knowledge you thought you knew, it might change tonight. It may not, it might. And stay seated and welcome Dr. Keanu. Aloha. Aloha. So, yes, my name is Keanu. And I'm the graduate course on Introduction to the Hawaiian State. And it was commitment school teachers and a couple from the University of Hawaii that took the class. And when you have me for a whole semester, then you get it. If you have me for a presentation for an hour and a half, you'll get it for that evening and you might forget about it the next day. So repetition is good if it's on a lecture basis, 1.5 hours each or 2 hours and so forth. But it was pretty rewarding for me to actually be an instructor in the graduate level, teaching these high school teachers, intermediate and elementary, because the topic here was about Hawaii as a country. It's not an argument. So I'm not teaching at the graduate level to present an argument of what is. I'm presenting my research that explains what is. And that's very different, okay? So I'm not here to gain people's support in believing a particular way of thinking, okay? That's what we call rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of convincing. You see that in politics a lot. This is merely a presentation of what is. And I like to say with all due respect, it actually doesn't matter what you think, because it is what it is. And that's just the way it is. Okay, so that's the best way to approach it. Don't fight it, just try to understand it. That's the key. Okay, make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so the topic of my talk is going to be about acts of war. What exactly does that mean? Okay, because that topic right there plays a pivotal role in what happened 125 years ago tomorrow, January 16th. Okay? Which led to what happened as a result the next day on January 17th. Acts of war. And these are important terms. So my PhD is in political science. I'm in public law and international relations. I'm not Hawaiian studies. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a historian. I'm not a geographer. I'm actually a political scientist. So my area of focus is on public law and international relations. And we deal with these terms all the time. Okay, it's part of what is called international relations, acts of war, comity, yeah, all these issues. So what's important about this is if you look at Hawaii from today's perspective, history has to get through a filter, right? But if you look at Hawaii from yesterday, then you don't have a filter. You're letting history tell you what happened. Now basically that concept right there is how you do research. Research is based upon testing your hypothesis, which is your approach, right? Not trying to prove it. And once you test it, you adjust it, because what you may think or you assume may not be. And that's why you're testing your hypothesis. And once you identify, or you have a pretty good grasp on your hypothesis that, you know, I think this is actually what I need to research, then you apply the appropriate theoretical framework that allows you to interpret historical events. And that's called facts. Okay, facts. But a fact or facts mean nothing if you don't have a theory that can explain it. And that's what theory does. Theory is the ability to explain phenomenon without which you wouldn't understand it. Now, the layman terms, let's say you don't know what football is, but you go to a football game. First time ever watching a football game. What you're watching on the field are what is called facts. The fact that this guy is called a quarterback. The fact that this guy is called a defensive end. The fact that this guy is called a referee and so forth. Okay? If you don't know the theory of football, you won't be able to understand what you're watching. It just looks like a bunch of guys running around. Because, you know, that's exactly how I felt when I first saw rugby. Because it looked like football, I just couldn't understand them. What are they doing? You know, but once you understand the theory of rugby, like number one, no forward pass. Now it makes sense why they're going like that, right? And then once you get that, then things make sense. And the thing about it is when you have the appropriate theoretical framework, you can actually start to predict what's going to happen next, right? See, that's when you're engaged in the game. That's when you're engaged in the understanding. if you're still watching the game and you're looking at everybody like, what's going on? Okay, you haven't gotten the theory yet. For us, we're not changing the facts. The facts are still there. All I'm doing is readjusting the theoretical framework called the rules. Basically, we've been trying to explain a football game using baseball rules. And that's why things never made sense. I'm going to get you to see it through the rules of football. And this game of football is rough. You have terms such as acts of war, state of peace, yeah? Reciprocity, comity. These are terms that apply to a football game. It doesn't apply to baseball. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Because it is through this theoretical framework that we're going to start to understand in depth what happened between the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom in 1893, 125 years ago. Any questions? You guys good? You guys with me? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start off with this. I mean, folks already know, most of you know about it already. This is very important. Very important. So this is the Hawaii State Teachers Association in Boston, Massachusetts, this past summer. Okay? And the NEA, which is a convention of affiliate unions, right, from throughout America, they passed a resolution, new item 37. So it says here from their Facebook, today the National Education Association's Representative Assembly meeting in Boston approved new business item 37. The NEA will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. That's profound. Very profound. Okay. Now, it says that they will document, NEA will publish an article. Well, I was approached by those who, here, Amy Peruso, Eric, and Ulu. So I'm actually putting it together for it to be published by the NEA. So working on that right now. Trying to make it very user-friendly. But we also want to make it, and what I'm pushing is, don't make it as if it's an argument. Just explain what happened. And who best to explain what happened? The President of the United States, President Grover Cleveland, through his investigation. That's the important thing. Not what somebody off the street is saying. Because when the President makes a conclusion, his presentation or his message to the U.S. Congress, his conclusion of the investigation, that is what we call dispositive. Dispositive means settled.
Except for Trump.
Well, I'm going to stick to 1893 before it starts to go downhill. But what's important is in the United States constitutional law, only the president can speak on behalf of the United States, period. Not the vice president, not the State Department secretary, not a special commissioner, not the United States Congress, not the Supreme Court. It's the United States of America because he's the executive officer. So that's a settled question and answered. He speaks on behalf of the United States. So when he spoke on behalf of the United States in 1893, in what happened in 1893, we must take heed to what he said. It's not what Fox News says. It's not what the commercial advertiser says. It's not what so-and-so says. Because you know what? We're all insignificant in this system of a government official making a statement, because that president made certain statements and terminology that invoked certain aspects of international law. And he knew that. He definitely knew what he was doing. He was not evading the issue. If anything, he came full on and said exactly what it was. So it's pretty profound. We've always heard about the President Cleveland's message and the investigation, but only now we're starting to understand the depth of it because of the theoretical framework. Now that we know football rules. Now, this idea of an illegal occupation. An illegal occupation can only exist during war. You cannot have an illegal occupation during peace. Okay, right off the bat. It only takes place in war. That's just a given. That's not an argument. Okay, and that issue of an illegal occupation has just been recently published. A work by Tom Kaufman by Duke University. Now, Duke University is a very high-level publishing entity. And they wouldn't publish something that said something like that. Tom Kaufman's book, and actually wrote a book review on that in the Hawaiian Journal of History that just came out. So I encourage you folks to go read that, my book review. Nation Within, The History of the American Occupation of Hawaii by Tom Kaufman. And I asked Tom, did you change anything in there? Because you submitted to the editors. And he said, I didn't change anything. Because he came out with this book in 1998. And it used to be called Nation Within, The American Annexation of Hawaii. Annexation. Then in 2009, he changed it. Second revision. Nation Within, The History of the American Occupation of Hawaii. And then he maintained that title here. So that's what's important, right? So the word is getting out from an academic standpoint, not just with the National Education Association, but also Duke University. But I can also attest to PhDs and masters and law journal articles and other published articles that speak to this. And it's going across the world. It's not just in English. You know? So things are happening, really happening, as far as exposing what's going on. And that's what's important. Okay. So if we're going to talk about Hawaii at war, because that's the only way you can conclude we're occupied, right? We first have to identify, was Hawaii a member of the family of nations? Because the word international, the term international law, inter means between. National, nation, law. International law is literally the law between nations, not within nations. That's important to know. So if they're between nations, then do they apply to all nations? And what is a nation, right? You have the Cherokee Nation, you have the Irish Nation, you have the Scottish Nation, you have the Basque Nation, right? So nation, from an anthropological definition, is very cultural. So a nation, an anthropological definition is a group of people with a common ancestry and language, right? That's pretty much a nation, okay? Now, that's different from what is called a state. A state is a country that no doubt a nation created. So a nation can become a nation state. And you may have heard that before, nation state, right? So Great Britain. In the past, Great Britain would be called the United Kingdom a nation state. But yet that wouldn't apply because nation is singular. It's not a nation state. Nation state. It implied that only England was United Kingdom. Actually, the United Kingdom is made up of Scottish, Welsh, English, and the northern part of Ireland. So that means there are multiple nations within that state. So gradually that term nation state dropped yeah, in terminology. The legal term of a nation that we're going to talk about is a state. Make sense? So a state is a defined border, right? Centralized government, people within it, and the ability to enter into relations. That's a state. Okay. Now there's also a difference between what is called an independent state and a state. Because in the 19th century, not all states were independent. But yet all states were nations. You guys can follow that? Okay. So if you are an independent state, that means that you are a member of the family of nations. So international law only applies to independent states, not states that are not independent. So the question then is, well, what is independence? Independent state or independence is a political term. What that means is your laws over your territory, that state exists independent of other laws over other territories, meaning other states cannot bring in their laws because your laws are independent. Okay? That's an independent state. So we need to understand whether or not Hawaii is an independent state before we can start to use international law that can explain what happened on January 16th and 17th. You guys follow me?
Is there a difference between the way you're defining independent and sovereign?
Independence and sovereign are synonymous. Yes. And that's an international term, sovereign, right? So independence and sovereignty basically is synonymous because your laws exist over your territory. That is your sovereignty. And sovereignty is supreme title over your territory, supreme authority over your territory. Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah. Now, you can be a state, though, that is not independent. And I'll give you an example, Japan. Or let's say Siam, which is Thailand, back in the 19th century. Back then, these countries, non-European powers, were subjected to members of the family of nations, these independent states, France, Russia, Germany, United States. They would actually impose their laws within their territory. That's a sign that they're not independent. So let's say an American citizen gets into trouble in Siam, in Thailand. He could only be prosecuted under American law by the American consulate, called consular jurisdiction. The consulate serves as a court. That is a clear non-recognition of Siam's independence, because Thai law could only apply to Thai people, even though you have foreigners within that territory. Same thing applied in Japan, right? So Japan and Thailand, or Siam, were not independent until the latter part of the 1800s. By 1899, Japan became universally recognized as an independent state. 1899. That's after 1893. You guys see that? Now, you also have a state within the United States that is not considered independent, but used to be independent. So I'm going to kind of use these terms so you can get a deeper understanding of this theory. Okay. So, in 1783, the former colonies of the United States won the revolution. Right? 1783. The Treaty of Paris was signed. King George III clearly recognized, explicitly recognized the 13 former colonies as independent states in a confederation. So confederation is a loose union of independent states. Just like the European Union today is a confederation. It's a loose union of independent states. Okay? And Great Britain pulled out of it. It's called Brexit. You hear a lot of it on TV. But while Britain was in the European Union, it was still independent. Only its laws applied over its territory, unless it agreed that the European Union laws can apply, right? But you're still controlling your independence, okay? Now, in 1789, in the United States, these 13 former colonies gave up their independence into the federal government, forming the United States of America. So they moved from a confederation into a federation. And that is when New York, after 1789, which used to be independent, was no longer recognized or considered an independent state, because you not only have New York law within New York territory, but what other law you have? Because there's more than one law that was applied there. Federal law, passed by the U.S. Congress. These are two different laws. That way New York is not independent. But prior to 1789, there was no other law throughout New York territory than New York law passed by its legislature. Make sense? So you guys see the terminology is important. Okay, so a lot of the people in the sovereignty movement, they're going after sovereignty, independence, called the independence movement. What does that mean? If you're going after independence, what does that imply? That you're not independent. You're trying to get it, right? Okay, but that independence is a political aspiration. That means it's not a legal reality. It's like the southern states during the Civil War. That was a sovereignty movement. They were moving for their independence in a confederation, what used to be before 1789. That's what they're going back to, right? Called the Confederate States. Okay. But that's an aspiration. It wasn't a legal reality, and they lost the war. Okay? So independence, coming out of an independent state, is secession. People are trying to break away to become, right? What I'm going to present to you, and I've always been a part of this, I am not a part of any independence movement, and I am not part of the sovereignty movement. Even though people hear the word sovereignty. No. I'm here talking about the Hawaiian Kingdom that was already an independent state. And then international law will then explain how that continues to exist given a certain situation. Am I making sense? Does this theory make sense? This football theory? Okay. So, Permanent Court of Arbitration, the World Court, acknowledged in its arbitration award that in the 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom existed as an independent state, recognized as such by the United States of America, the United Kingdom, and various other states. They're referring to independent states. Now, what this legally means right here is important. Because somebody might just say, oh yeah, they acknowledge the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. It says it was recognized by the United States. Let's just take that right there. What does that mean? What does it mean that in the 19th century, the United States recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state? From the United States perspective.
It's like they have some kind of greater authority to even decide who's independent, who's not. That's what I'm interested in.
Well, they're just we'll just take the word face value. The United States is recognizing the Hawaiian Kingdom as an independent state. What does that mean right there?
It means the U.S. law won't apply to
Exactly.
Americans.
So what that says is the United States, American citizens in Hawaii in the 19th century cannot claim protection from American law. Like they could claim in Siam, in Japan, right? That's what that means. That the United States recognized the Hawaiian Kingdom was independent. So that means every American citizen in the 19th century, we don't have a point marked yet, but at some point in the 19th century, they could not claim protection under American law. They were subjected to Hawaiian Kingdom law.
Right.
And then it also says, and it was also recognized by the United Kingdom. So what does that mean? Now, British subjects in the Hawaiian Kingdom cannot claim protection from British law. But they could claim protection in Siam, Japan, Persia, Ottoman Turks, yeah, China. Yeah, they were subject to unequal treaties. Make sense? Now, did you know that the Hawaiian Kingdom, as an independent state, was imposing its laws within Japan? So any Hawaiian subject, that's the nationality of the Hawaiian Kingdom, any Hawaiian subject getting into trouble in Japan could only be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate under what is called consular jurisdiction. Why? Because the Hawaiian Kingdom was a part of the family of nations, and it only numbered 44. 44. And Hawaii was the only non-European nation other than Haiti. But the difference between Haiti gets a little complicated. Yeah, because Haiti actually was an uprising of slaves. And they said, oh, you're independent as long as you pay us, because that's property. They looked at the ones who revolted as chattel. Yeah, I think $124 million, something like that. They had to pay. They basically they held control of Haiti, and did you know Haitians had to go borrow that money from the United States? Yeah, and then Woodrow Wilson, he actually went there and pillaged the banks of Haiti. So when Trump says Haitians live in a place that is not too good, the United States has a lot to do with that.
Yes. Yep. Amen to that.
And that people don't know because they don't know the history. See, if you just hear the rhetoric, you just believe anything. You can Google this. You guys can go look it up. It's all there. But for Hawaii, we didn't have that. We didn't have ransom. We were fully independent, which is unique. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just saying that's what it was, right? But then when you compare and contrast, you're going, wow, that's kind of interesting. But here, I'm not picking a side. I'm just saying, what was Hawaii? Okay. So Hawaii was one of 44 independent states. Today, we have 193, actually 196, right? Because some of them are not members of the United Nations. Maybe 197. This 193 is in there now. Kosovo, Serbia, Cook Islands, Holy See. Yeah, 197. Yeah, 97. Okay. But we were part of the original family in 1844. So if the United Nations was created in 1893, we would be a member. Yeah, we would be a member. And what's important is only independent states were members of the family of nations, and therefore subjects of international law. So now I think I provided a basis for me to now use international law to explain what happened between two independent states called the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom. Make sense? Okay. So according to Judge Greenwood, a former judge on the International Court of Justice, he says that traditional international law was based upon a rigid distinction between the state of peace and the state of war. Countries were either in a state of peace or in a state of war. So for us, we're looking at the 44 countries. We're not looking at the whole world, just the 44, and what international applies with regard to them. Okay? And there was no intermediary state. You're either in a state of peace or in a state of war. You eat a hot pie or you're not hot pie, right? There's no middle stage of being hot pie or pregnant, right? Okay, that's the way it works. Because what happens is when you go from a state of peace into a state of war, the rules change. And international law actually regulates war. Till today, it regulates war. Okay? So war was seen in the 19th century as a means of ultimate dispute resolution, where the countries become judge, jury, and executioner. So international law does not prohibit war, it just regulates it, right? And today we refer to the Hague and Geneva Conventions, which are codifications of existing laws of war since the 19th century. Okay, that's what's important. It's not new laws, it's just codifying. Now, this is clearly articulated in a very well-known scholar and professor, Oppenheim, on international law. He's always cited across the world. In 1905, he came out with Volume 1, International Law, a treatise, which is an authoritative book, and it's called Peace, right? So that refers to international laws that apply to peacetime. And then he has Volume 2, International Law, Volume 2, War and Neutrality, another set of rules. So the question is, for us, where does Hawaii stand with regard to international law? So if the HSTA got their NEA resolution passed, I have all these goods. And it says that there was an illegal occupation of Hawaii by the United States. Which one does it fall under? See, that's what we have to determine, because that's going to provide a theoretical framework. Because you cannot explain an illegal occupation under international law during peace. You won't find anything in there. Unless it's called Pacific occupation. Pacific means peaceful, right? But Pacific occupation is where the country agrees to have military in its territory. There's some kind of treaty, right? Some agreement. Well, we're going to find out if there's any agreement. But right off the bat, we have to start off with the fact that occupations come under war and neutrality. Make sense? Okay. So Professor Quincy Wright, he's a political scientist, just like me. Yeah? His background is international relations and public law, just like me. I'm nothing like him, though. Right? But he was an advisor to the U.S. State Department. He is constantly cited in U.S. State Department records in the 1930s and 40s. In fact, one of his treatises that he put together, and he's known for, if you Google his name, was war. What does war mean in international law? Right? So he says, war begins when any state, any independent state, when any state of the world manifests its intention to make war by some overt act which may take the form of an act of war. So an act of war is an act of hostility between independent states, not between a state and an insurgency. If it's an insurgency, that's domestic. That's called treason. That's called acts of violence, not act of war, right? That's act of insurgency, not act of war. Okay. And then he also says, war in the legal sense means a period of time during which the extraordinary laws of war and neutrality have superseded the normal law of peace in the relations of states. That's why it's important to know, where do we stand? You start off with that. Okay? Am I playing football or am I playing baseball? We're playing football. I'm going to show you. So the Hawaiian Patriotic League, the forerunner of this organization, established by Joseph Navahi, 1893, after the overthrow of the Hawaiian government. You're going to see how important that is. Hawaiian government, not the Hawaiian kingdom. Okay? They stated in a petition to the U.S. president, and these are made up of statesmen. Statesmen, attorneys, government officials. Navahi was not only an attorney, he also served a very short time, but served nevertheless as the Minister of Foreign Affairs under Queen Lili'uokalani. He also served for 20 years, from 1872 to 1892, as a legislator, House of Representatives from Hilo. This guy's Akamai. He served as the president of the Hawaiian Patriotic League. Okay. John Cummins from Waimanalo, he had a ranch out there. He was also a statesman, right? Government official. He served as honorary president. Okay. So these people were high-level guys, right? It's like today somebody looking at, in America, these type of people. Kissinger. Well, Kissinger's the wrong one. Who else? John Quincy Adams. Okay. You know, or how people looked at Cleveland. Yeah, so when we say President Cleveland, then we should say Queen Liliuokalani, right? When we say Walter Gresham, then we can say, because he was Secretary of State, then we can say Joseph Navaji, Minister of Foreign Affairs. See, that's the level we're talking. Yeah, because remember, they're members of the family of nations. They're not some tribe trying to be something that they're not. So he says, this past January 17th, because they wrote this on December 18th, 1893. That's when he sent it off to the president. This past January, a political crime was committed, not only against the legitimate sovereign of the Hawaiian Kingdom, but also against the whole of the Hawaiian nation, a nation who, for the past 60 years, had enjoyed free and happy constitutional self-government. Let me unpackage that for you, okay? Because that's profound right here. There's some buzzwords that are there. In particular, a political crime. Oh, that's heavy. See, at that time, when one country does something against another country, it was normally perceived as an act of state, which means it doesn't have personal ties. It's the state itself. So it's called a delict. Delict is a violation of international law. Now, when you say crime, a crime means somebody hurt somebody and they need to be punished. That's what a crime is, okay? A political crime, right? Now, this is just years before 1919, after World War I, where they first came up with the term war crimes. And they actually admit that war crimes go back to the Brussels Conference in 1874. Which means it was, since then, the talk amongst the 44 independent states is this idea that private people can be held accountable for crimes. Because a country cannot commit a crime, right? A state. Why is that? Why is it that a state cannot commit a crime? Don't you need a perpetrator? Okay, so can anybody tell me what the state looks like? Can you touch the state? Can you put the state in jail? Can you put the state on trial? No. But individuals who represent the state, called officials, belong to what is called governance. Individuals can be put in jail, but the state cannot. That's why in the past they would call it act of state, meaning in war, just following orders. So you can't come after the individuals. This only didn't develop until after World War I. They're clarifying it. But here's Hawaii, already dropping that political bomb right there. Yeah, political crime. Against the legitimate sovereign. But the other part here is for the past 60 years, the enjoyment of constitutional self-government. What is self-government? Remember, it is the rules. Anybody know? What is a non-self-government? Non-self-governing territory. Okay, in international law, it's called a colony. Non-self-governing. That means you're a dependent territory of a state that is self-governing. And that when non-self-governing entities exercise self-determination, that means they want to become self-governing on their own. So self-governing is another word for independence. Make sense? But today, people refer to Hawaii as a non-self-governing territory colonized by the United States. That doesn't fit anymore. Doesn't apply, because Hawaii is independent. But once you take Hawaii out of that independence area, that family of nations, then we tend to look along, we appear to be similar to Native American tribes. We appear to be similar to our cousins in Aotearoa. Sorry, I got a little frog in my throat. So that term right there is basically coming from Hawaiian statesmen saying, yeah, we're already self-governing. meaning we are independent. And on top of that, we're constitutional, meaning our government is limited. Yeah? Our monarch is limited. It's a constitutional monarchy. Then they go on to say, this was done, this political crime, this was done by a coup de main of U.S. Minister Stevens in collusion with a cabal of conspirators, mainly faithless sons of missionaries, and local politicians angered by continuous political defeat, who, as a revenge for being a hopeless minority in the country, resolved to rule or ruin through foreign help. Now that, let me unpackage, is pretty heavy. First of all, that word coup de main. Anybody heard of that word coup de main? What is coup de main? Okay, what is a coup d'etat? So a coup d'etat is an overthrow of a government by the nationals or an entity within the state. That's a coup d'etat. And you see it all the time, right? A coup de main is a military strike. It's a foreign invasion. That's what a coup de main is. A coup de main is not a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat is internal. A coup de main is a foreign invasion. Tied to foreign help right here. Not foreigners in Hawaii, they're talking another state. Does that make sense? That's pretty heavy though. I like the fact though, that the reason why they did it, they were in collusion with the U.S. minister. U.S. minister is another word for ambassador. Ambassador John Stevens. In collusion with a cabal of conspirators called insurgents. That's all they were. Committed high treason. They're not businessmen. They're insurgents. And that's not a good thing to be called. But who's calling them insurgents, conspirators, are statesmen. So it doesn't ring across international law. This is merely local statesmen and attorneys using particular words to describe what happened. And they're using football rules. Right? And then what I also like is these individuals, mainly faithless sons of missionaries. Because everybody today blames the missionaries for everything. No, they didn't do anything. It was their children and grandchildren that did it. And guess what? They weren't missionaries. They were judges, attorneys, government officials who we're now realizing were racist. It's all coming out in the research. Yeah, they're racist. Right? But it wasn't the missionaries that overthrew the Hawaiian kingdom, so let's stop saying that. But these guys, these faithless sons of missionaries, were actually using the missionary title as if that's who they are, the missionary party. That's all it was. Yeah, like the Democratic Party. Make sense? Okay. So, President Cleveland. President Cleveland initiated his investigation on March 11, 1893, with the appointment of James Blunt, who arrived in Hawaii latter part of March and started his investigation, fact-finding, on April 1st, 1893. So this is 2 months after the overthrow. And he submitted periodic reports to the U.S. Secretary of State, Walter Gresham, because he has to report the final conclusion to the President of the United States. This is an international investigation. Think of that. It's like not Trump. Let's use Obama. That's like Obama appointed a special commissioner to investigate actions taken by U.S. military in Italy. That's this level. That's what this level is. Okay. So he says here on the 16th day of January, 1893, this was his conclusion. On December 18th, after the investigation was completed in July by James Blunt, and a dispatch to Cleveland on October 18th on the conclusion, and now Cleveland's message, December 18th. On the 16th day of January, 1893, this was a Monday at that time, Monday around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Between 4 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, a detachment of Marines from the United States steamer Boston with 2 pieces of artillery landed at Honolulu. Okay, they marched up Mililani Street, right up here, okay, from Honolulu Harbor. The men, upwards of 160 in all, were supplied with double cartridge belts filled with ammunition and with haversacks and canteens, and were accompanied by a hospital corps with stretchers, and medical supplies. What do you think they're getting ready for? not a Boy Scout,
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. But what does it mean, though, from somebody with authority, right? See, we can say, "Oh, that looks like war."
Yeah.
They're getting ready for war. Looks like that. But we need to look at whether or not, what did the president say? What did that mean to the president who speaks on behalf of the United States? He said, "This military demonstration upon the soil of Honolulu was of itself an act of war." Whoa, he just used a trigger word. Remember Quincy Wright? Remember Oppenheim? It's all in there. But he used the word. He did not evade the use of the word. See, normally countries evade that because you don't want it to go to a state of war. You want to say, well, we were justified landing because we had to protect American lives. See, then you don't trigger state of war, right? So you got to be very careful. Countries don't like to drop the word act of war. In fact, Dick Cheney is trying to get Trump to drop the term act of war with regard to Russian meddling. Because once you go act of war, you now go into state of war. And then, President Cleveland continues, if the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents, he's mentioning them by the term insurgents. If the Queen could have dealt with the insurgents alone, not with the U.S. Marines protecting them, her course would have been plain and the result unmistakable. But the United States had allied itself with her enemies. What is an insurgent? It's a person who revolts against an established government. You see it on CNN a lot. ISIS is part of an insurgency. They're going against established governments. An insurgent is a person who commits high treason. That's what an insurgent is. And what is treason under Hawaiian law, Hawaiian criminal code? Treason is hereby defined to be any plotting or attempt to dethrone or destroy the king, or the levying of war against the king's government, or the adhering to the enemies thereof, giving them aid and comfort. An alien, meaning a non-Hawaiian subject, whether his native country be at war or at peace with this kingdom, owes allegiance to this kingdom during his residence, and during such residence is capable of committing treason against this kingdom. So this idea that foreigners cannot commit treason in a country, oh yeah, they can, as well as the nationals of that country themselves. And whoever shall commit the crime of treason shall suffer the punishment of death, and all his property shall be confiscated to the government. So for Lauren Thurston and Sanford Dole to step out into this position, it's pretty ballsy.
Yeah.
That's bold. We used to say in the Army, that's bold and audacious. You better make sure you win your revolution, your coup d'etat. Because if you don't win it, you get executed. Right? So as a result of the U.S. Marines landing, protecting these insurgents, Liliuokalani protests and gives a surrender, a conditional surrender. I, Liliuokalani, by the grace of God and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Now let's stop right here, Hawaiian Kingdom. I hear many people refer to the Hawaiian Kingdom today as the Kingdom of Hawaii. It's not, so stop using that term. It's called the Hawaiian Kingdom, not the Kingdom of Hawaii. Even though you may see some foreign countries use it, like America, this is not the Kingdom of Hawaii. This actually is the Hawaiian Kingdom. And the reason why? Because during the time of Kamehameha I, you had 3 separate kingdoms that existed at the same time. Kingdom of Hawaii, Hawaii Island, Kingdom of Maui, and the Kingdom of Kauai. It was the Kingdom of Hawaii that consolidated the other 2 kingdoms, Kamehameha I. Since then, it was called the Kingdom of the Sandwich Islands, which then came to be known as the Hawaiian Kingdom. So that's why locally we should say Hawaiian Kingdom, especially when our Queen says it. And you see it in the laws and everything, it's Hawaiian Kingdom, not Kingdom of Hawaii. You see it in the apology resolution, that term Kingdom of Hawaii, 1993. That's an American law. So we have to look at it from the Hawaiian perspective, yeah? Meaning the national perspective, not the ethnic. Because the word Hawaiian is not an ethnicity under American law. It is a nationality. Hawaiian is a short term for Hawaiian subject. It's a citizenship. Like British is a short term for British subject. American is a short term for American citizen. You can be black, you can be Asiatic, you can be Asian and still be American. The same thing, you can be black, you can be Asian, you can be Irish, you can be Scottish and be Hawaiian. Hawaiian is a nationality. Make sense? Again, as part of the football rules. Yes.
So back in the day when all of the government forms used to ask your nationality.
We always get it wrong.
we put Hawaiian
Hawaiian, Chinese, Caucasian, Hawaiian, Portuguese.
or just Hawaiian, and we were actually identifying ourselves as Hawaiian Kingdom.
I don't think we knew that though. See, because I used to do the same thing. When I worked at Doe Cannery during summertime, long time ago when I was still a cannery, fill out the application. What's your nationality? Oh, Hawaiian, Chinese, Caucasian. What's your ethnicity? Hawaiian, Chinese, Caucasian. They asked me twice. It wasn't until I joined the army, the sergeant said, nationality. He put down American. Oh, that's what nationality is, American. My bad. But everybody back home, we tend to confuse or conflate citizenship or nationality with ethnicity. Yeah. So that's another thing that we have to be careful of on how we use it, because you can be Caucasian and be Hawaiian. Yeah. Make sense? Okay.
Can Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, is that still correct?
It evolved to the, well, okay, so the evolution of this Hawaiian Islands, Kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands, that's what Kamehameha the first referred to himself as, who consolidated the kingdoms, okay? So in 1827, there was a move by the National Council of Chiefs in Honolulu to change the name from Sandwich Islands to Hawaiian Islands. And it was actually the native chiefs that came up with that word, Hawaiian. Because the word Hawaiian is an English word, right? A-N. Hawaii, A-N. Hawaii is Kanaka. That's the native language. Hawaiian is an English word, okay? So that's why it's confusing when people put the Okina in an English word, Hawaiian. You ever saw that?
Yeah.
No. That's an English word, Hawaiian, no Okina. So in 1827, the chiefs got together and said they want to change the name from the Sandwich Islands to the Hawaiian Islands, because it was in 1778 Captain Cook named the archipelago the Sandwich Islands, named after his promoter of his travels, the Earl of Sandwich, right, from the British Admiralty, paid for his travels to map the Pacific. Now, the reason why they made the change from Sandwich to Hawaiian is really indicative of the native translation of Hawaiian Islands. So the native translation for Hawaiian Islands is Ko Hawaii Pai Aina. Okay, so Pai Aina means islands or isles. Hawaii is a subject. Ko is a possessive, meaning this Hawaii owns something. So Ko Hawaii Pai Aina literally means the islands that belong to Hawaii. The kingdom of Hawaii. Because that's where Kamehameha came from. Make sense? So it's the islands that belong to Hawaii. Now, if it was Ka'eo, who was the king of Kauai, that consolidated the islands like Kamehameha, then it would probably be Ko Kauai Pai Aina. Kauaian Islands. Or if it was Kahikili from Maui, it would be Ko Maui Pai Aina. Mauian Islands. That's the background of the term. And then you start to see in the constitutional aspect of the kingdom's evolution, they refer to the kingdom of the Hawaiian Islands or the Hawaiian Kingdom. That's how they refer to it. But
when did it become the Hawaii Kingdom?
you start to see it used probably 1840s as the constitutional evolution, because they're settling on what name should we be referring to ourselves as. Yeah. But right off the bat, the Queen is using it, that she is under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So that's the only point I want to make. Make sense? Okay. Oh, sorry. So I, Lili Ukalani, by the grace of God, and under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, because she's an executive monarch, she's not above the Constitution, do hereby solemnly protest against any and all acts done against myself and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom by certain persons claiming to have established a provisional government of and for this kingdom. So one thing that should resonate here is there's a difference between a provisional government and the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Provisional, what does provisional mean? Temporary. Acting, pro tem. That's what provisional means. Now, the only way that you can constitutionally and legally establish a provisional government within a state and a constitutional system, you have to do it based upon a legal argument of necessity. You are impelled to create this provisional government, this temporary government. And if you read the proclamation of the provisional government, all they start to do is they start ranting about the Queen and how bad she is. What they're trying to do is they're setting the record on them not committing treason. See, because when you become a provisional government and you're self-declared, and it's not based on any necessity, but just selfishness, yeah, or greed, okay, that's treason. Make sense? So the only way you get away from that is you gotta do it by some necessity. So if you read the proclamation by the provisional government, all they're talking about is how bad everything is, which prompted us to do what we gotta do, right? But that's where provisional government comes from, based upon necessity, right? So they're saying, we did it by necessity. The problem is, what the Queen is gonna say, it's not by necessity. You're directly tied to a foreign entity. So the next thing she says, that I yield to the superior force of the United States military, whose minister plenipotentiary, the ambassador, His Excellency John Stevens, has caused United States troops to be landed at Honolulu and declared that he would support the provisional government. Now that right here took it out of necessity. She just made a claim this is a puppet creation by a foreign entity through what Joseph Navahi and them refer to as a coup de main. You see how these things are all tied together? They're using the right terms, that's why. They're talking football. And they're trying to say this is not a real play. The flag's got to be thrown. The yellow flag. So she concludes, now to avoid any collision of armed forces and perhaps the loss of life, I do this under protest and impelled by said force, yield my authority until such time as the government of the United States shall upon the facts being presented to it, under the action of its representatives, and reinstate me in the authority which I claim as the constitutional sovereign. Now what's important to know here is she's referring to a collision of armed forces. That's another term that is international. Armed forces belong to an independent state. So who are the armed forces, the collision of armed forces here, at this stage on January 17th that she's referring to? U.S. Marines and the Hawaiian military, headed by Marshal Charles Wilson. Yeah, that's what she's talking about. Is she making any reference to the insurgents? No, it's almost like she's putting them aside. This is state to state. And she's saying, your ambassador just landed troops, and they're protecting these guys who committed treason. So when you read her protest, it's pretty illuminating based upon the terminology. And the one who actually wrote that protest was the former Attorney General of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Paul Newman.
Is that the same Wilson who became a mayor?
Charles Wilson. I don't know.
The father.
Oh, that was.
Is the father of the one that became the mayor.
Wow.
Oh, okay. So that's Charles Jr. Yeah, who became mayor. John Wilson. Yeah. What did I say? Charles. Okay, no, but Charles Wilson was the marshal.
Right.
The son, the mayor is John. Got it. I was like, his name is John.
I remember
Okay.
seeing his picture in
Yeah.
the city hall.
And Marshal Charles Wilson was a Hawaiian subject, right? But he wasn't Kanaka. He was actually Tahitian Haulian. Yeah, so that's a good example. Somebody at that level is not Aboriginal, right? Again, it's the issue of allegiance, and your nationality is the key, not your ethnicity. So President Cleveland told the Congress, he's articulating who these insurgents are. When our minister recognized the provisional government, the only basis upon which it rested was the fact that the Committee of Safety declared it to exist. It was neither government de facto nor de jure. Another two terms used in international law. De facto. What is a government de facto and what is a government de jure? Government de facto arises out of a successful revolution called a coup d'etat. That's what that means. They said they weren't because they really didn't have a revolution. It was the Marines that was protecting them. That's the problem. And a government de jure is a lawful government through appointment, yeah, not a provisional government. They were not a lawful government. They were neither. So de facto means government arises out of a successful revolution. De jure arises out of lawful means. So can you see how in Cleveland's message and the investigation, there are terms there that are so important that if you gloss right over it, you missed it. And you know, only now we're starting to revisit these things that have been done 125 years ago, which resonates even more loudly and clearly today. Because you know why? We're all waking up. And now we're starting to understand what's going on. So President Cleveland told Congress, by an act of war, committed with the participation of a diplomatic representative of the United States and without the authority of Congress, the government of a feeble but friendly and confiding people has been overthrown. Now that word, right here, act of war, he just made a conclusion. The government was overthrown by an act of war. So not only was the invasion an act of war on January 16th, but the overthrow of the government was an act of war. It's a consequence, it's an outcome, right? Now when he says feeble, he's not being derogatory, because states of the family of nations were known as, they're all powers, but you have big powers and small powers. So we're like Luxembourg, yeah? We're not a powerhouse, but we're a state nevertheless. So when he says feeble, did you know that actually works in our favor? Because they overthrew a small country's government. That works in our favor, right? And then he also said, I instructed Minister Willis, he's the new ambassador to Hawaii, to advise the Queen and her supporters of my desire to aid in the restoration of the status existing before the lawless landing of the United States forces at Honolulu on January 16th. If such restoration could be effected upon terms providing for clemency. Clemency is amnesty. So the next sentence after that is amnesty. Now there's a difference between what is called amnesty and a pardon. Okay. A pardon, and you hear a lot of, on CNN, right?
Yeah.
Okay, a pardon is alleviating punishment of a statute, right? But did you know when you receive a pardon, you actually admit to guilt? It's just not the punishment. You're relieved of the punishment. And the guy, Arpaio,
Yeah.
the sheriff, yeah, he actually thought that he wasn't convicted. He didn't admit guilt. And there was an MSNBC guy who's a lawyer. He said, "Oh no, you did." that is inherent in accepting a pardon. You admit guilt. It's just you won't be punished. Now amnesty is different. Amnesty applies, or clemency, amnesty in particular, applies to offenses against the sovereignty of a state. That's amnesty, not a pardon. So he's asking for the Queen to grant amnesty to those who were in the provisional government because they committed high treason. Because if she doesn't grant amnesty, remember the treason statute? They get executed. And all their property gets confiscated. But it's only when she's restored, because then she can grant the amnesty. But when you grant the amnesty, you're also admitting to guilt that you committed the crime. So when Cleveland referred to these guys as insurgents, that is a heavy word right there to be applied to these individuals. And then he's asking the Queen, would you grant amnesty to these people? Although the Queen agreed to the conditions of restoration and committed to granting amnesty after she's restored, it was never carried out for political reasons in Congress. Now, people will say, too bad. Actually, too bad for the insurgents, because they're the ones who are still insurgents. So they can thank Senator Morgan and everyone playing politics in Congress that did not alleviate them of being insurgents and traitors. They're not businessmen. Charles Reed Bishop, Lauren Thurston, Sanford Dole, Samuel Damon, William O. Smith, traitors. They were never granted amnesty because the Queen was never restored. That's what's important to know. Make sense?
So they died as traitors.
They died as traitors. And their property is going to be subjected to prosecution so they can be disseminated. Because they would still have to be posthumously convicted to release the property to whoever got it. Yeah. So that's another wrinkle in this, right? But again, we're using the legalese to explain a very complex issue.
But she was reluctant to do that, wasn't she? She agreed to do it, but she was reluctant.
Absolutely, because they actually negotiated 4 meetings before she finally agreed. Negotiations started November 13th. It finally was completed December 18th. At first, the Queen said, no, the law is the law. Now, why did she say the law is the law? Because that's in the Hawaiian Constitution. It says no one can be given a pardon, which is the closest word tied to amnesty. No one can be given a pardon in the Hawaiian Kingdom until after conviction. So they got to be convicted first. And that's why she said, I can't give it. They were convicted. But she finally accepted, I will grant amnesty according to the law after they're convicted. But you could also use common law, British common law and even American common law, that they don't have to go through a trial if you admit guilt. Because if you accept the amnesty, you admit guilt, and we don't have to go to trial. Make sense? But the bottom line is she never followed through because she was never reinstated. That's what's important. So in order for a treaty of war, a state of war to transform itself back to a state of peace, you need a treaty. And that negotiation with the Queen was an attempt to get a treaty, to go back to a state of peace. And that was never carried out. Never carried out at all. So, in this game of football, we have to separate the state from the government. Right? And we kind of touched upon that about war crimes. Yeah? Or crimes. You can prosecute individuals who serve a government, but you cannot prosecute a state that is more of an abstract idea. Yeah, that's like trying to prosecute Bank of Hawaii. Can't touch it, but you can prosecute the CEO of Bank of Hawaii. That's different. Now, what was overthrown in 1893, which is very important today, and I keep stressing this, that overthrow of the government did not overthrow the state. That is so important in international law. Because in international law, it is the state that is the subject of international law, not governments. Governments are the subjects of the state's law, right? Whether it's constitutional. That's why all governments are geopolitical, depending on the place and history of that area. Every government is different, but all states are the same. Defined border, centralized government, people in it, ability to enter into foreign relations. So the key here is the state was never overthrown. If anything that you can get out of this whole presentation is in 1893, the only thing that was overthrown was the government, not the state. That's what's important. Okay? Well, on January 17, 1893, according to the laws of war, Hawaii came under belligerent occupation. So now we go back to that NEA, new business item, the illegal occupation. Now, under the laws of war, there are two legal orders. One of that of the occupier, or the occupying state, and that of the occupied state. So the occupying state has their military belligerently occupying the territory of an occupied state, and the occupied state doesn't have a government there because it was overthrown. That's why they're occupied, right? You can't occupy something if the government's still there. But if you overthrow that government, it's called occupation, and the occupier must administer the laws of the occupied state. They serve as a temporary government until a treaty of peace has been signed. We don't have a treaty of peace. All we have is a surrender to look into this situation, and then he confirmed to the Queen, you're right, we're in the wrong. And we have to reinstate. According to Judge Crawford of the International Court of Justice, he says belligerent occupation does not affect the continuity of the state, even when there exists no government claiming to represent the occupied state. So international law actually protects our country, even when we didn't know it. It protected it.
So when you said there are 197 countries,
Today,
we're still a country.
we're still a state, so it should be 198. You're right. Good point, Henry. See, that shows he's listening.
Did the Marines withdraw?
The Marines were ordered to go back on the ship on April 1st by James Blunt before he started his investigation, and the American flag was lowered and the Hawaiian flag risen. And that flag that you see outside, State of Hawaii flag, that's the Hawaiian Kingdom flag. That's what's, and you're going to see that and how it resonates now. And that's a national flag. National flag.
So I guess my question is, can you call it a U.S. occupation if the Marines were withdrawn and insurgents were foreign subjects? So how does,
Good question.
How does that?
Good question. See, it takes a professor to ask those kind of questions. Okay. So the issue here is, how can occupation, belligerent occupation, continued to take place? Well, number one, the Hawaiian government was overthrown. So we know that that's a fact, right? So there is no government, but a foreign entity is here. So the question is that foreign entity foreign? Right? Okay. So President Cleveland, what did he refer to the provisional government as?
Insurgents.
Well, he called them insurgents, right? Meaning they're traitors. They were created by John Stevens. John Stevens created them. That's called a puppet government. So that's a puppet of the United States, and that's not of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So these individuals were levying war against the Hawaiian Kingdom. Remember the treason statute. But they're levying war through a foreign help, the United States. And these individuals were actually being protected. After the U.S. Marines left, guess what they were doing? Bringing in mercenaries from San Francisco to protect them. So although the U.S. military wasn't here, their puppet regime was here. And the president did nothing to remove them. He admitted they were neither a government de facto nor de jure, they self-declared. But they were maintained through foreign help. That's why the occupation began, number one, because the government was overthrown. And the government could not be reinstated because the insurgency was still being maintained by the United States. That's the difference. Right? Good point, man. Good point. Now, there's the law of occupation that applies here. There's a difference between being under belligerent occupation, which is a situation, not foreign control, but foreign imposition and no government of the occupied state, as opposed to what is called the law of occupation. The law of occupation requires the occupier to administer the laws of the occupied state. But you cannot administer the laws of the occupied state until you're in effective control of the occupied state as if you're the government. So that's the difference between invading a country and the laws of war apply, but you're not in effective control of the territory in order to administer the laws. So they call that invasion. It's transient. It's fluid, right? But once the United States foreigner establishes itself as in control, they have to administer the laws of the occupied state. If they don't have effective control, then that law doesn't kick in yet to administer the laws of the occupied state. Because how can you administer the laws of the occupied state? In theory or in fact? Meaning you commit the crime, I can grab you. I can hold you accountable.
You can do part of a state.
Yes, and that portion will be occupied. So like in Iraq, Baghdad was actually occupied in effective control. But the law of occupation didn't apply outside of Baghdad. That was still a war zone. So it's always based on effective control. What we have here is the United States puppet was in effective control. The problem is it's not a government. It's an armed force. That's the term that is used. It's an armed force. But an armed force, under the laws of war, can declare itself to be a military government when they're in effective control and begin to administer the laws of the occupied state, and they administer it on behalf of the country they're fighting for. So at this stage, we can say Hawaii came under belligerent occupation once the government was overthrown, January 17th. Now, whether or not the law of occupation to administer the laws of the occupied state, that's still in question, which we all know they didn't do. But it didn't say we're not occupied. We're still under belligerent occupation. But the laws of occupation has not been complied with. Because what's also underlying this is the United States is trying to give the impression that this never happened.
Right.
The United States was trying to say it was an internal revolt called a coup d'etat, which was not a coup de main. See, they kind of sidestep Cleveland's message. And they start to use what is called Senator Morgan, political rhetoric going on. And all they did was just obfuscate this whole thing. But if you look at it clearly, Cleveland's message, clear. And he's the only one that can speak on behalf of the United States, not Senator Morgan, not politicians in Congress, not newspapers. But the newspapers and the members in Congress just started spreading false information. Sort of like what you're seeing now, the lies that are taking place with a straight face. Imagine what's going on back then. Because what the Congress wanted was Pearl Harbor. That was the whole reason why this fiasco happened in 1893. Okay.
When does American effectiveness in Hawaii take place? Like if Stevens didn't send the Marines back, but Blunted in April, and Sanford Dole as a Hawaiian subject was committing treason, when does the American effectiveness in terms of government over Hawaii? When does that, is there a blip in there? Does it continue? Does it
Well,
start?
Minister Stevens, through his puppet, was creating control. And Minister Stevens was acting on behalf of the United States. And that's what Cleveland said. An act of war committed by a member of the diplomatic corps without the authority of Congress. So he's nailing it on the United States. That's what he did. Now, whether or not the United States began to apply the laws of occupation, they didn't. We know that. But they were supposed to. But because they didn't apply the law of occupation, does not mean Hawaii wasn't occupied. Because the law of occupation requires to administer the laws of the occupied state. As far as the foreign entities still in Hawaii, they are by virtue of their puppet and also bringing in mercenaries once the U.S. Marines landed. And then in 1898, the U.S. Marines are going to come back in and physically reoccupy Hawaii during the Spanish-American War. So there's no break or blip. The bottom line is when Cleveland said the government was overthrown by an act of war, that's conclusive. That means we don't have a government. That means we're under occupation. Make sense? Okay. So, I want to separate state of peace, state of war. Remember the two treatises from Oppenheim, give you an idea. So under state of peace, you have economic trade between the citizenries of the country that's promoted, encouraged, trade. Contracts between the citizenries were protected under treaty of peace. You can rely on your treaty, right, that you have with that country. Once you go into a state of war, did you know trade is suspended between the citizenries? You can't trade with the enemy. That's the rule. And any contract that you entered is void during a state of war. Like it never existed. Ooh, how's that? That means from 1893, everything made between a Hawaiian subject and an American citizen, void. That's what the law says.
Or shipments of oil from occupied Iraq.
Basically, all non-hostile relations between citizenries of the two belligerents is void unless you get permission by the government to do trade. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, so if they still continue as though it's an existing contract, even though it is void, and basically one guy decides that, okay, I'm not going to pay you.
Then he has every right not to pay. That's what the law says. That's why the treaty, that's why countries do not want to stay in a state of war. It's called get back to a state of peace. It creates havoc economically. That's the point. And that's called trading with the enemy. That's why President Cleveland was trying to negotiate with the Queen to bring it back to a state of peace. In fact, Secretary of State Walter Gresham was telling Albert Willis in a particular dispatch, your dispatches to me are embarrassing. That's what he said. You will continue to negotiate with the Queen until you get a settlement. Push. He was pushing because you're entering the state of war, bro. And it's out of their control. Make sense? Now, this is just what the rules are. You're starting to see the ramifications from this.
Does that include real estate contracts?
Any non-hostile contract, and the term that's used in Oppenheim and others, any non-hostile relationship between citizens of the two belligerents are void. Not voidable, void. And it can only exist with permission by the government of where that contract is in, or that relationship. But how do you get permission from the Hawaiian Kingdom to allow trade if the government is overthrown? You see how bad this is going to start to get? It's like it's going to get tangled, right? So also, state of peace. Government of the state administers its laws. Right? It's called independence, sovereignty. Individuals born in the state acquired its citizenry. It's called natural born. Well, under state of war, it's the occupying state that must administer the laws of the occupied state. And individuals born in an occupied state acquire the citizenry of their parents, not the occupied state. So there's no natural born provision during occupation. So foreigners who were born in Hawaii, let's say a British subject born in Hawaii, did not acquire Hawaiian citizenship. He acquired the citizenship of his parents. He's Italian still. Even for me, when I'm born in Hawaii, I'm not a Hawaiian subject because I was born here. I'm a Hawaiian subject because my great-grandparents were Hawaiian subjects because of the laws of war. So these are just some examples of what the two systems speak to. Right? And it's pretty heavy. I'm a retired captain from the Army, so I can kind of relate to it a little bit. But I never thought it was this vast. Because once you identify and clearly articulate Hawaii to be a state, right, then everything just flows from there. So in 1894, the insurgency, called the Provisional Government, changed its name to the Republic. That's all they did was change their name. Still an insurgency. And then, did you know natives, native Hawaiian subjects, aboriginals, started jumping on the bandwagon? High treason. Oh, we got names. So it's not a racial issue, the missionaries, no. It's called allegiance. And one particular person, Reverend Kohane, he's a traitor. And that's my good friend's grandfather. You know, so we're also dealing with that, right? In 1900, the Republic of Hawaii changed its name to the Territory of Hawaii. And did you know, under the laws of war, American laws have no application within the territory. So remember here, the occupying state must administer the laws of the occupied state. Well, all laws passed by Congress imposed in Hawaii are void because they're supposed to be administering Hawaiian law, not American law. See, that's the main provision of the law of occupation, or the laws of war. So when the U.S. Congress renamed the Republic into the Territory, all they did was change the name. They didn't give it any authority. But then, our own people are being caught into this system because they got to survive. They got to live because the police force, the fire department, the teachers, no job, right? But it doesn't make it legal. It's still an insurgency. Now you got to work on their brainwashing, right? Then in 1959, state of Hawaii was formed, changing the name from the territory. Still an American law, limited to U.S. territory because they weren't administering Hawaiian Kingdom law. So now I work for the insurgency as a faculty at UH. So does Niklaus. We're all insurgents. Wait. I'm a victim of circumstance. I'm a victim of circumstance.
Can't beat them, join them.
Since the provisional government was self-declared, and so are its successors. So the state of Hawaii is illegal. Even though my uncle is in probably some police officer. My son is in the police academy. I was in the National Guard. You see this? You see what's happening? It's like we're starting to get caught in the matrix.
Yeah.
You know?
We're and you're matrix. So technically speaking, if you declare yourself a spy for the enemy,
I don't declare nothing. I'm just saying. See, we don't live in the state of Hawaii. We live in a state of confusion. I'm serious.
1894, the provisional government changed its name to the Republic of Hawaii. What was the name before that?
Provisional government. And before the provisional government was the Hawaiian Kingdom. See, all the provisional government did, these insurgents, was take over the position of the Queen and her cabinet. And Marshall Wilson. So that's 1, 4, 5, 6 people. That's all. And everyone stayed in place and said, you will sign oaths of allegiance to us, the new regime. All they did was hijack an existing government and turned it into an armed force, which was self-declared. And now we're getting caught. Now, why are we in this position? It's not because we made rational choices. It's because the United States violated international law, period. So this is not a blame game. We're not going around blaming people. But the United States did not do what they were legally obligated and what they were supposed to do. And that's why we're in the position we are. So we have to keep that in mind. This is not our fault. But don't jump on that side and say, well, now I'm going to protect the United States. Okay, now you're committing high treason. Be careful what you say. Because whatever you say can and will be used against you. And that's important because that's real. We're getting into that area. The best thing to do is, I don't know, let me go do more research. Let me try to find more information. It's all there already. We got academic journals on this stuff, right? NEA is publishing an article on the illegal occupation.
Yeah.
And we just hit the highest level of teaching throughout the United States. So why is it that we think the way we think and why we live in a state of confusion? Because we're the product of denationalization. Let's stop putting the blame where it's at. Samuel Damon, he's an insurgent, so-called vice president of that sovereignty group called Provisional Government. He says on the record, during the Republic of Hawaii era, in 1895, he said, if we're ever to have peace and annexation, the first thing to do is to obliterate the past. How is that?
Nice guy.
And that's in the record, called the Cabinet Minutes of the Insurgency. And they also said, if we take out the Queen and ridicule her, we take out the people's support. So a lot of focus was on the Queen. Yeah? And how you deal with the people? Obliterate the past. Now, how do I obliterate the past with you folks? Can I all of us, let's say Russia took us over 2 years ago. Can I convince you guys all Russian?
No.
Can I convince you to speak Russian?
No.
It'll be difficult, right? And the only reason why you will tell me you're Russian is because you're probably afraid of me because it might put you in jail. That doesn't mean I obliterated your memory.
Right.
Right? Unless I went through some brainwashing that Pol Pot did, right? The killing fields, which really didn't change any memory until you killed a guy. Then you obliterated his memory because he's no longer here. But could I do that to you folks? Literally? Seriously? Who can I change then? Children. Your children. I can control how your children are going to learn. So who's this guy, Samuel Damon? He's a trustee of Kamehameha Schools.
Yeah.
Kamehameha Schools became the flagship of brainwashing. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the, actually all the trustees were traitors. They're all insurgents, like President Cleveland said. Not me, I'm not saying they're insurgents, I'm saying Cleveland said it. They weren't given amnesty because the Queen wasn't reinstated, so I guess they're still traitors. Make sense? Now, what is denationalization? It's the process by which to obliterate the national consciousness of a state. That's a war crime. That's a war crime. And this is how they did it.
Yeah.
Formally. Not that it happened, it didn't happen before. This is the formal policy of this so-called insurgency. Program for patriotic exercises to be exercised in the public schools, including the private schools, all the schools. The theme of the program was to indoctrinate the children of Hawaii to be American and to speak English. That's how you're going to conceal this. This is why what I'm saying here is so shocking. If you folks were direct descendants of our kupuna that went through it and you weren't brainwashed, what I'm saying to you, you're going to say, ah, yeah, that's right, I understand. The fact that you're fighting it is you're a product of this, as I am a product of it. So this is my grandparents' generation. So my tutu, she was born in 1910. This is her generation of brainwashing. But her parents, my great-grandparents, were born in 1880. They were the ones that their brainwashing couldn't take place. Intimidation could take place, right? Decisions of physical harm could take place, but brainwashing, no. And this is a picture taken at Kaiulani Public School. 614 school children of brainwashing. And the letter, the heading here says, we give our heads and our hearts to God and our country. One country, one language, one flag. That's my tutu's generation. And all they were taught was American presidents, American history. That's it. Star Spangled Banner, Yankee Doodle Dandy. No, it's all in the program for patriotic exercise. It's pretty mind-blowing when you read it. It says, this scene shows a salute to the American flag which flies in the grounds of the Kaiulani Public School, which has many Japanese pupils. The drill is constantly held as a means of inculcating patriotism in the hearts of the children. So the word inculcate is to indoctrinate through repetition. That's the definition of inculcate. It's kind of amazing that they actually documented that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, gee, that's evidence of the crime right here. We are inculcating patriotism in these children. Whoa. Excuse me, you're in a foreign state? Isn't what Germany did in Luxembourg?
They also said, and not to question. And you're not to question.
Yeah, you get beaten for speaking Hawaiian. You know, my grandpa, my papa, he only went to 8th grade because he wasn't good enough to go to high school. Back then, Honolulu High School, before the name was changed to President William McKinley High School. So yes, he started working 8th grade. And a lot of my generation's grandparents all worked out of 8th grade.
Yeah.
And all the ones that were good Americans, speak good English, you go to Roosevelt,
Yeah.
you go McKinley,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's how you reinforce this control, through brainwashing. So by the time it got to my parents' generation, my dad was born in 1939, it's already institutionalized. My dad didn't know anything. By the time it got to me at Kamehameha, out of sight, out of mind. All I cared about was trying to beat St. Louis in football. Not that we're an occupied state. In fact, I even went to a military college to get a commission as a second lieutenant. Oh, sorry, wrong army. I didn't know that. But can you see how big this is once you put Hawaii in the place that it's supposed to be put, called an independent state since the 19th century? Once you put it there, everything just flows and it makes sense. And now the terminology that is used by Navahi and others, and the Queen, you're going, oh, they knew it. They were talking the language. They didn't say colonization. Yeah? They didn't say non-self-governing. They were talking about occupation.
Can obliteration also be when you destroy all of the paper records?
That's just destruction of property.
I
That's
know
actually another war
destruction,
crime.
but that's the part where the history is no longer in existence.
Well, actually, you know what? The mind-blowing thing is, it wasn't burned. It's all there. It is. That's how we're coming up with our research. It's actually there. The best place to hide something from you is, guess what?
In plain
Right in
sight.
front of you. Right in front of you. Yes.
I was told that the schools, during my grandfather's time, there's a couple times where, indoctrinating kids, that the schools only went up to 8th grade. And those who could afford to send their children to higher grade levels were able to. But the Hawaiian kids, majority of the Hawaiian nationals, were sent out to, Kanaka rather, were sent to go work. Because that's what
Well, in this article that was published in 1907, Harper's Weekly magazine from New York, they actually interviewed the principal of Honolulu High School, which is public. You don't have to pay to go there. He said, if you don't do well from grades 1 through 8 to be a good American, you're not accepted into Honolulu High School. That's a public school. So it's not a private. So that's how they maintain control, right? And fostered the ones who would speak in their place. And eliminate the ones that don't speak in their place. Because my papa was quite kolohe. In fact, his nickname was Torpedo. What was that? And it gives you an indication. You know, my papa was like, probably was still pissed off at Hawaii's occupation because his grandmother was telling him. Because my actually great grandmother who raised him in Wainiha, on Kauai, she was actually the chanter for Kalako and Queen Liliuokalani's court.
Wow.
So he must have known something that was taught. And then he was brought from Kauai here. All he knew was Hawaiian. That was his language. And he had to learn English. So within 2 generations, the national consciousness of the Hawaiian Kingdom was obliterated and replaced through Americanization. Americanization interfered with the methods of education. Compelled education in the English language. Banned the use of Hawaiian in the schools. Imposed drafting of Hawaiian nationals for U.S. wars. That's a war crime. Vietnam, Korea. Imposed American administrative and judicial systems. And it imposed American financial and economic administration. And that basically kept pounding and pounding and pounding on our people until we became a minority in our own country and we didn't know who we are. And we're the victims of it. We're the victims of circumstance.
You're the evidence.
We're the evidence of the crime, not the crime.
That's right.
But don't step into the crime once you know you're the victim. Because we got some Kanakas that are stepping into the roles of those in the past without even knowing it. And that's not good. Not good. Because, you know, under the laws of war, you know, war crimes have no statutes of limitation. Yeah. That's why after World War II, you still had Israelis hunting Nazis into the 80s and 90s. There's no statute of limitations. That's part of the laws of war. It removes statutes of limitations on everything. Yeah. So since 1893, there has been no lawful government in the Hawaiian Islands. Does that make sense now? But boy, have we gone through a lot. Yeah. But there was no government here. This was just control. Right? Well, since elections cannot take place, because you cannot have elections during occupation. Why is that? Why is it that you cannot have elections during occupations? Why is it that you need a government to have an election?
The wrong government.
Because who registers the voters, right?
Yeah.
You need a government, right? Who sets up the voting polls? Precincts, you need a government.
Yeah.
It only stems from the executive branch. Yeah? Let's say California, it stems from the governor's office, right? So you need a government to have elections. How do you have elections without a government? You don't have elections. Right? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? So, can you understand that you cannot have elections during an occupation? Because occupation is an indication there's no government there representing the occupied state. Make sense? Okay. So, what I'm about to share with you folks is, with me coming to this reality check back in 1994, that's when it hit me, like, this is what this means. So I retired from the Army. I was in the Army National Guard at that time. Retired after 10 years, so I was honorably discharged. Found out I was a mercenary. I don't want to say I was a traitor for my country, right? Because I didn't know. I had no idea. And we had to move on this. So, do you think people need to be involved to get this thing moving? Given that Hawaii is a state. What do you guys think? Is this a people movement?
No.
Why? Not just no, but why? Why is it not a people's movement?
Government.
What represents the state in international law? A government. Right? So you need a government, not people. But you need people to be in government. But in order to have people in government, you don't have elections. How do you get people in government to represent the state? You see what I'm saying? So you're kind of looking at the situation. How do you...
Didn't Senator Dole, what did you say earlier, it took 6 guys?
Yeah, provision. They had
6 guys that made a government.
actually 14, I believe. 18?
14? How many?
18?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Four.
How many?
Committee of the advisory committee, I believe, was 14. The executive committee was 4. I think 18 total. It was both the executive committee and the advisory committee that replaced the Queen and her cabinet.
It was 18 guys.
Let's say 18 guys. Okay, so these 18 guys created what is called the provisional government, right? So people created a government, but they based it on necessity. And their necessity was, we gotta do it because the Queen is bad. We gotta protect the lives and property and this and that. They're trying to justify necessity. So, did those in 1893 come about as a people movement? No. It was individuals that took a position, except they took the wrong position upon the wrong justification.
With the help of the Marines.
No, 1893. These are provisional government members. So what we're going to do is basically, I'm going to learn everything that I can about what happened back then. And you know, when you come down to it, all the players that were part of 1893, U.S. Marines, military, provisional government, United States, they were actually, if they did it the right way, it would be okay. If they did it the wrong way, it wouldn't be okay. So, a provisional government should have worked with the U.S. Marines to administer the laws of the occupied state. That's how it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't. They hid it. They said we're the provisional government, and the Marines weren't part of the invasion. And that's when the lies began. So all we're going to do is go back into time and reverse everything. So we're going to do what the provisional government was supposed to have done, if I was there. So we're just reversing everything, right? So first thing we're going to do, we're going to take steps in line with how governments were formed in exile during World War II. 1995, a provisional government was established to represent the Hawaiian Kingdom called the Hawaiian State in international law. And the principle relied on was the legal doctrine of necessity, where we're going to cite the real necessity, not making up the rhetoric of necessity that the Queen's a tyrant and people's properties were in jeopardy. That was all a lie. We're going to really state what is the necessity. Right? So this is what the law says on the law of necessity. If the private party of a country wants to assume the role of government, an imperative necessity must arise of the existence of exceptional circumstances not provided for in the Constitution for immediate action to be taken to protect or preserve some vital function of the state. That seems like us right now. No?
Yeah.
No, we have a situation here. Over 100 years of occupation.
So Keanu, can you go back to the last slide, please? Okay, in 1995, how did that happen?
Yeah, I'm going to get there.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So I'm going to say that that's what happened.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so it's part of our history. It actually happened, but I'm going to explain how it happened.
All right.
Okay, but it happened by necessity. It's not just spontaneous. Like, hey, we decided to be a provisional government because right off the bat you do that. That's treason. Because that's what those guys did in 1893. Also, there must be no other course of action reasonably available. Okay, so I gotta take a look at this and see how we can play in this game. Third, actions taken must be necessary in the interest of peace, order, and good government. It must not impair the just rights of citizens under the Constitution. And it must not have the intention of consolidating power. Because that's treason here, making like I'm the one, right? So pretty much all these things have to be kept in mind when we take steps to form a provisional government. And that provisional government, according to the precedents set by the exiled governments in World War II, it has to be directly tied to the legal system of the state before the occupation, meaning you have to operate on the legality of that system. An example would be Czechoslovakia. During World War II, Czechoslovakia had what is called a national convention in London, where Czechs who escaped Czechoslovakia, the invasion by the Nazis, formed their own government. The Alii says that's not the real government because there is no provision in the Czech constitution that allows a national convention to be done on foreign soil. So they reorganized under that system, boom, they got recognized. They had to go back to what was the law before the Nazi invasion. You cannot arbitrarily make up your own, like having an election, unless the law says it, right? Especially in a foreign territory. So what we did was we had to follow the law itself in the Hawaiian Kingdom that existed, and we utilized what is called the Council of Regency. So the Council of Regency is made up of, and Regency means one who serves in the absence of a monarch. A regent is not a monarch. A regent serves in the absence of a monarch. In the Hawaiian Constitution, this is how it worked. Remember, my background was Hawaiian law, because you got to know Hawaiian law as well, more so than international law. Under the Constitution of the Hawaiian Kingdom, the monarch is an executive monarch. What is important about an executive monarch? That means that there's no prime minister in the Hawaiian government. An executive monarch is both head of state and head of government. So that's important to know. So in the Hawaiian Kingdom, it's an executive monarch. So Queen Liliuokalani was an executive monarch, right? There was no prime minister, even though sovereignty groups are claiming to be prime ministers. That doesn't apply. Now, the cabinet of the monarch is made up of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Finance, Attorney General, and Interior. 4 cabinet officers. When the monarch dies without a successor, this cabinet serves as a Council of Regency. That's called Article 33 of the Hawaiian Constitution. That Council of Regency, serving in the absence of the monarch, then reconvenes the Legislative Assembly to elect by ballot a successor. And that happened with Lunalilo. So when King Kamehameha V died, his cabinet became the Council of Regency, a provisional government, temporary, because they weren't, the one who appointed them was died. They convened the legislature in special session, right? And then Lunalilo was elected. Lunalilo steps in. His cabinet has to carry out that same procedure. When he died 1 year later, they served as a council of regency. Convening the legislative assembly, King Kalakaua was elected. So the regency is there. So what we're going to do is we're going to assume the role of the regency. And there's a way that we could have done it. We did it through the Minister of the Interior. So the details of it, I'll point to you where you can read it. But there's actually a way that you can assume the chain of command. I learned this from the Army. Assume the chain of command. But it has to be within the chain of command, not outside coming in. You got to come inside going up. Make sense? Okay, so we did that. And we're going to create a provisional government. So Hawaiian state still exists, right? With or without my knowledge of this, right? Still exists. Hawaiian government illegally overthrown. State still exists. We're going to create a provisional government. And this is not the sovereignty movement. You guys can see that, right? This is not acting upon independence, seeking independence. We're not trying to secede from the Union. We have a limited mandate, given our situation. So the purpose of the provisional government as officers de facto, meaning not a successful revolution. Officers de facto mean in fact. Like you might hear one day the acting police chief. Well, that police chief wasn't appointed by the commissioners. Will assume the chain of command. It's called acting. Police chief comes back, he goes back down being assistant chief. Okay. So first, to expose the occupation of Hawaii. That's the first mandate. Expose. Not tell every one of you what to do, because we're just a provisional government, similar to the governments in exile. In fact, the way we assume the role of a provisional government is very similar, almost identical, to Belgium during World War II. King Leopold was captured by the Nazis. Belgians fled. They formed a provisional government in London through a council of regency of the cabinet. It's interesting that the Hawaiian Kingdom's constitutional system has very clear connections to Europe, not just to the United States. Second, to ensure that the United States complies with the laws of occupation, which includes the Hague and Geneva Conventions. And third, to provide for an effective transition for governance under Hawaiian law when the occupation comes to an end. That's all it does. Nothing more, nothing less. You don't pay me nothing, but I got to do this because I assume the chain of command. And I have to make sure that everything I do with the people that I'm working with, we don't venture into treason. Everything has to be justified. Everything has to be limited. Even in light of everybody here being completely ignorant of what we did, because this is back in 1995. So the fact that you folks are learning about it now doesn't mean it didn't happen. It actually happened. But can you see why this is not part of the sovereignty movement? Make sense? Yeah. That's the key. Okay. So now it's going to get tested. So right now I could have told you a really good story. Full of political rhetoric. Making up terms. Using a PowerPoint. Full of bells and whistles. And I got you guys mesmerized. What if I made up this whole thing? Could have. Yeah? I mean, Hawaiians can tell stories. I've seen Hawaiians tell stories like, oh, come on. Remember my uncle told me, Keanu, don't bullshit the bullshit. Okay, uncle, got it. I'm still learning. So it's going to be tested. Tested. Everything I just said is going to be tested. Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands, 1999. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration was established by a treaty. In 1899 was when they began to codify the laws of war. And they wanted to establish a permanent institution called the Permanent Court of Arbitration to resolve disputes before countries go to all-out war. That was the whole purpose. It's called the Hague Convention for the Pacific Settlement, Peaceful Settlement of International Disputes, which can only be applied with independent states involved. That's what's key. So the Permanent Court of Arbitration is in the Netherlands, and it's the oldest road court. Provides arbitration. So it's an intergovernmental organization. What it means is they create tribunals to resolve disputes called ad hoc tribunals. You guys know what ad hoc means? So ad hoc is not permanent. It's temporary, meaning due to a certain situation. That's ad hoc. So they don't have standing tribunals. What they have is arbitrators that can be selected to sit and convene a tribunal to address a particular dispute. Okay? So, in order for the Permanent Court of Arbitration to form a tribunal to resolve an international dispute, is that one of the parties, or both of the parties, has to be a state. Can you see how important that word state is? That's an independent state, not like the state of California. The state of California cannot access that court, but the United States of America can, because they're independent, not California. So you can have a dispute between two states. So these two states are going to submit a dispute, and if the tribunal determines that both of them are factually states, not theoretically, then they'll assist in formation of the tribunal to resolve whatever dispute that is. And that decision is binding between the parties. Okay. So here we have, from the case repository of the Permanent Court, Ecuador versus United States, 2011. So the United States accessed that court as well. And the dispute here is regarding Article 2, subsection 7 of the treaty between the United States and the Republic of Ecuador. And if you notice, they identify the claimant. Claimant is plaintiff, respondent is defendant. Ecuador state, United States of America state. Okay? Now they can form the tribunal, and it goes off and it does what it does. And the Permanent Court of Arbitration becomes the repository and the administrator of administrative services. Filings, registries, transcripts, the whole thing. So they can also hear disputes between a state and an international organization. So this is between Peru and the United Nations. So they identify Peru as a state and the UN as an international organization. Then they formed it. Now, when you identify these entities, you have to identify them as a matter of fact, not theoretical. Because if they're not in existence, then you don't have a dispute, right? It's got to be a real entity. And then we have between a state and a private party. And this is the Hawaiian Kingdom. And this is a dispute with regard to the 1849 treaty between the United States and the Hawaiian Kingdom. So a dispute between Lance Larson and the Hawaiian Kingdom. Lance Larson, a Hawaiian subject, alleges that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom is in continued violation of this treaty, blah, 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 because it is alleging that the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, because they're allowing the unlawful imposition of American municipal laws over the claimant in the territorial jurisdiction of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Right there says a lot. But you got to make sure that the Hawaiian Kingdom is a state. But they verified Lance Larson as a private entity and the Hawaiian Kingdom a state. So if they're saying the state exists, that's the respondent, doesn't the state need a government to speak on its behalf? Right? Aren't there saying Lance Larson is alleging the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom? That's not the state, that's the Hawaiian Kingdom government representing the state. So they just acknowledge the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a state, but also the provisional government as representing the state. Make sense? If this was all made up, that wouldn't have happened.
What was the date on that, Keanu?
The case started in 1999, ended 2001. So we go to the second part. This is the treaty or contract under which the proceedings were commenced. 1849 Treaty of Friendship, Commerce, and Navigation with the United States. Language of the proceeding, English. Seat of arbitration, Netherlands. These are the arbitrators. This is Nemia Parks representing Lance Larson. That's me representing the Hawaiian government. So what I'm sharing with you here is I'm not trying to convince you this happened. I'm just telling you it happened. Remember, it's history. It happened. But people didn't understand it because people didn't know what is international law, let alone people didn't know even what was occupation back then. Only now everybody's starting to learn it. Okay? So this is the American Journal of International Law. So now here's commentary from an established entity with regard to this case. At the center of the PCA proceeding was that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist and that the Council of Regency representing the Hawaiian Kingdom is legally responsible under international law for the protection of Hawaiian subjects, including the claimant. In other words, the Hawaiian Kingdom was legally obligated to protect Larson from the United States' unlawful imposition over him of its municipal laws through its political subdivision, the state of Hawaii. As a result of this responsibility, Larson submitted that the Council of Regency should be liable for any international law violations that the United States had committed against him. So this is now an American Journal of International Law responding to this case. And you know, everybody in Hawaii was befuddled. It was stumped. Well, John Van Dyke, he was stumped. He couldn't explain this. Ken Conklin was trying to say the permanent court got bought out. No, it's crazy stuff going on. Because nobody even understood how the game of the laws of occupation applied. But we did. So that's how we got there, right? So,
What was the practical result of that? Besides they recognized the one kingdom, which is great, but what did that mean for you that you're liable for international law violations?
so what happened here was Lance Larson is the plaintiff. Remember, we're the defendants.
Right, exactly.
He's coming after us, alleging we allowed American laws to be imposed here, which led to his incarceration and unfair trial. That was and pillaging. These are war crimes. Okay, so it was sort of a tort issue, right? We're not the ones who directly violated his rights, but we allegedly, indirectly, was violating his rights because we allowed America to violate his rights within the Hawaiian Kingdom by allowing American laws to be imposed here. That was the whole thing. Now, according to international procedures, there is what is called the indispensable third-party rule. Okay, and there were two cases at the international court level that dealt with that issue. So the first case was 1953, 1956, 1950s. It was Italy versus United States, Great Britain, and France. And it was called monetary gold, removed from Rome in 1943. Italy was going after these three countries, US, France, and Great Britain, because they want to divvy up the gold. The court said they cannot proceed because there's an indispensable third state. And if the tribunal looks at conduct of a state that is not a party to the proceedings, they can't claim to have jurisdiction because they don't have subpoena powers. They can't mandate a state to come in to the hearings like you would otherwise within a country itself, right? So that indispensable third party is important. So basically, Italy could not proceed to come after Great Britain and France and the United States without the third party called Albania, because Albania actually owned the gold. It was the Albanian bank that was in Rome, not the Italian bank. So they couldn't proceed. That created a precedent called the indispensable third-party rule. The second indispensable third-party rule was East Timor. East Timor is a Portuguese colony. Okay? And after Portugal pulled out of East Timor, so East Timor can go through decolonization under the United Nations, self-determination, Indonesia invaded East Timor and occupied East Timor in the 1990s. And they were reaping resources in East Timor. Indonesia entered into an agreement with Australia to do offshore mining. Portugal was saying, hey, that's still ours. Because remember, it's a Portuguese colony. East Timor didn't become independent yet. So Portugal filed a complaint against Australia in the International Court of Justice. So Portugal versus Australia. The indispensable third party, Indonesia. Because the court said in order for them to determine whether or not Australia is liable, they need to also look at the conduct of Indonesia when they entered into the agreement with Australia for the mining. So that's the second indispensable third party rule. Nenia Parks was running into the same problems, the attorney for Lance Larson. She wanted to have first of all, the tribunal determine that Lance Larson's rights was violated by the United States during the trial and incarceration, and the incarceration and pillaging. After the tribunal makes that determination, then she's asking the tribunal to then determine that the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Council of Regency, is liable for those violations. So we were second tier on the procedural order. So before they could come after us, the United States needed to be a party. Well, the United States was actually invited to join in. Myself and Nenia Parks traveled to Washington, D.C. and met with the U.S. State Department, provided them a formal invitation to join in. They declined the invitation eventually, but they asked permission if we could have access to all records and pleadings. Which means they did not deny the existence of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and they also asked permission from the Hawaiian government for the records. So this case went on. Oral hearings were held in December of 2000. Ultimately, Lance Larson needed the United States as a party before he can come after the acting government for not protecting him. Make sense? So that's what happened. But they also said, though, the tribunal said that the indispensable third party rule will not apply if the parties get out of arbitration and go to fact finding, which the permanent court also does. A fact finding commission of inquiry, because they serve similar to a grand jury. They don't prosecute, but they find probable cause for another government to prosecute. And that's what it is. So they provided that aspect. So we didn't follow through with fact finding. What we felt was that we needed to educate people in Hawaii. So when I got back home in December of 2000, I entered the University of Hawaii, January 2001, to get my master's degree in specialized in international relations, to get my PhD, which is what I got in 2008. And I've been teaching ever since, sitting on doctoral committees, encouraging more research, traveling the world, expose. Remember what the provisional government is supposed to do? Expose. Expose. That's all it is. Keep exposing, right? It's not on me. Don't focus on me. Focus on the occupation. And last year, that's when everything is about to go to the next level, because the South China Sea case came out. South China Sea case was Philippines versus China. Because in the South China Sea, China is building islands for military buildup, right? One of their islands they built was in the 200-mile EEZ of the Philippines. Both are signatories and parties to the Law of the Sea Convention that says you will go to binding arbitration if there is a conflict. Binding arbitration. So what the Philippines did, filed a complaint against China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration, same place where we're at. Okay. And then the decision was made last summer, and this is their case. So this is the South China Sea case, Permanent Court of Arbitration. The dispute is the Law of the Sea Convention, right? They identified Philippines as a state, Republic of China as a state. And what they had to deal with preliminarily was indispensable third party. The tribunal of their own said, will our review of this dispute involve an assessment of a conduct of a state that is not a party to these proceedings? Just like East Timor, just like monetary gold. Yeah? And that's what they have to determine first. So they actually got around that. The Philippines made an excellent argument, because what they said was, we're not asking for you to determine whether or not the conduct was lawful. We're just asking to determine whether or not these islands that they're building are actually islands or are they rocks. Because in the Law of the Sea Convention, a rock is something that is not capable of human habitation. And if it's a rock, it can only extend 12 miles. 12-mile radius called the territorial sea. But if it's capable of human habitation, then it can expand 200-mile EEZ. China was claiming 200-mile EEZs on these islands, pretty much blanketing the South China Sea for control, right? So they made that argument, and it was successful. The tribunal said, we have jurisdiction, now let's move to the merits. Now we'll determine that these are not islands, they're actually rocks. But their decision came out on jurisdiction regarding indispensable third parties. So paragraph 181, and by the way, before I put that up, when I read that, I'm thinking, indispensable third party, I know that case, I know those cases. I'm thinking, what if they cite the Hawaiian Kingdom? I know East Timor and monetary gold, I know those cases quite well, because we have to know that for this case. What if they cite the Hawaiian Kingdom? And when I looked it up, I went, ooh. Here we go, paragraph 181. The present situation is different from the few cases in which an international court or tribunal has declined to proceed due to the absence of an indispensable third party, namely monetary gold, removed from Rome in 1943, East Timor, and Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom. Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom has now become the third precedent case in international law. If this was all frivolous, if I was not in the provisional government, another tribunal would not be citing this case. In all of those cases, the rights of third states, respectively Albania, Indonesia, and the United States, would not have only been affected by a decision in the case, but would have formed the very subject matter of the decision. Because Larson was asking the tribunal to determine whether or not the United States violated its rights. You're now specifically looking at the U.S., who's not a party. And without them, you can't get to us. Additionally, in those cases, the lawfulness of activities by third states was in question. Where here, none of the Philippines' claims entailed allegations of unlawful conduct by Vietnam or other third states, because the South China Sea was not just made up of the Philippines and China. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Brunei. Those were third states that the tribunal had to determine whether or not they might have to review their conduct. Make sense? The bottom line is, the case happened. They should be taught in schools. This is not a political process here. I'm trying to convince you guys. I'm just explaining what happened because I teach it in my classes. I write about it in my law journal articles. But everybody, people out there don't want to touch it because then it means, well, Kingdom is still a state and I'm part of the provisional government. Oh no, let's just keep them in the sovereignty bucket. Let's keep talking about colonization and indigenous rights because that's too real. This is too real, right? And it gets into perfect title, it gets into contract, everything that we've done in the past. But beside what anybody thinks, it really doesn't matter. Because it is what it is. And I'm the one accountable for what I do, not what you do. So I got to make sure I got the eyes on the target, but I also have to have my eyes behind me. I walk around eyes wide open.
Yeah.
So what is a remedial prescription here? And by the way, we are now engaged in Commission of Inquiry proceedings. That started. My deputy agent is from Italy, Professor Lenzerini, University of Siena Law School. He would not be involved in a frivolous case, right? And I don't want to try to say I'm justifying what I'm doing. I'm just explaining it because I've spoken to so many people. It's like I'm talking apples and oranges. Oh no, that's too close. I'm talking apples and automobiles. A wider distinction. And you know what the commonality of everything is when I talk to people? The lack of education on this system. That's the problem I have. So you know what I do? I teach this system in my classes. You can apply it to Palestine, you can apply it to Germany, you can apply it anywhere. All you gotta do is throw the Hawaiian Kingdom in there. Make sense? So we must have a plan how to fix this problem, because I gotta live here too. And you know this stark reality of Hawaii being occupied? Remember the false alarm? Nuclear missile attack? To me, that was real. Real. The fact that it wasn't fired, no. The threat is real. And I think what everybody experienced here was vulnerability. What do? That's what it showed. In fact, on Saturday when it happened, I was at Windward Community College, part of a conference with Kamana Beamer and Donovan Prezzo, giving a presentation for a senior project for Hina from Halau Kumana. And in the audience were teachers from the DOE. And here comes this thing with the ones who showed up early. We had to go Palanakila building because that was the most concrete building. Not that it's underground. Trust me, I know what nuclear weapons can do. When I was in the Army, we're trained for tactical nukes fired out of artillery pieces. That's not good. Hawaii is targeted by North Korea since 2013. Yeah, Kim Jong-un said it. The fact that we're targeted, that's a problem. Because it's not a matter of a missile hitting us. The fact is we got a target. You can get hit by a dirty bomb. You can get hit by low-level weaponry. The problem is we're targeted. Now, why is Hawaii targeted? Why did Kim Jong-un target Hawaii? Because the United States military is here. It's called Pacific Command.
But would they have to knock out Guam?
What you do in the military is you anticipate who you're going to be going against. It's called a preemptive hit. You hit them before they hit you. Now, this guy already announced it. He said, I'm hitting Hawaii. The only thing you got in Guam is a naval base. What you got here? You got headquarters for Pacific Command. You got headquarters for the Pacific Fleet. You got the Marine Corps. You got the Air Force. This is the brain center. It's called command and control. That's a target. They're not targeting our beaches. They're targeting the military. So really, who is the threat here in Hawaii?
United States.
It's the United States military. That's the threat. Because that threat has caused a belligerent to target Hawaii. So what do? to, how do you remove the threat? So how do you remove the threat? That's the real question, right? Is that a people movement? You think we should all get together and put on red shirts? Start marching on Waikiki? No, in light of what happened on Saturday, I'm being very truthful of that. Because we've done that before. Has that changed anything? Nothing. So how do you remove the threat then? Because obviously the U.S. military is not going to move because you say they got to move.
Negotiate with government.
No. No. How do you get them to be removed? First of all, the U.S. military comes from the United States, right? And I used to be in it. If it comes from the United States is a state. What regulates the United States in international affairs?
U.S. law.
No. International law. International law. Not domestic law. Yeah? Not environmental impact statements. International law. What international law regulates an occupation? Laws of war. Not the laws of peace, right? Right, we started from the beginning. So within the laws of war, called international law, it's not a word that I use to convince people of war. I'm just saying war is part of international law. Wouldn't we have to utilize that system to deal with the threat? That is a completely new game than what people are used to today. Completely new. That's why my job is to educate people as much as possible on the system first, as opposed to the substance of us within the system. Does that make sense? So how do you address the threat? You talk the language of the U.S. military. I was in it. It's called Hague and Geneva Conventions. You talk about state responsibility. You talk about Article 43 of the Hague Convention. In the case of Lance Larson, you know those issues of unfair trial, unlawful confinement, and pillaging? That's Article 147 of the Geneva Convention. Those are war crimes. There's no statute of limitation on committing war crimes. See, once you start that language, it becomes much more precise. But when you start to dull it, yeah? When you have people talking cultural rights, cultural practitioner, it's dulling the issue. That is all in a state of peace. We're not in a state of peace. The Hawaiian Kingdom cannot exist in a state of peace. The state of Hawaii exists in a state of peace. If we are in a state of peace. Make sense? So what I'm showing you here is not only do we need to understand the system, but it's through that understanding of the system that you can develop a strategy to address a particular problem. So if you're playing football, you got to come up with a football play, not a baseball play. And I'm being even more upfront now because of that threat that came on Saturday. That just made it real. Because what if it was a missile? You don't know. Guess what? Err on safety. Just go, you know what, there could have been one. And now, what do I do? All of a sudden, people are thinking my family.
I just don't see the threat. I really don't.
Well, the problem is you'll see the threat after it's done. Right now, this is a nuclear situation that we're involved with. And the fact that everybody panicked speaks to that threat. Even though, Henry, you don't believe it, or everybody else believed it. Guys was crying up at UH. Up at Weber Community College, I heard people talking on the phone or in Palanakila trying to calm down the daughter. See, that's real.
I think it's the state and the government and the military trying to scare people.
Well, you know what? It worked. They scared them. Oh, no. The thing is, it's not the missile, it's the targeting. You can get hit with a dirty bomb. You can sneak in here and set up something in Honolulu Harbor. See, that's how it is. But no. Whatever the particulars are, the point is, this is an existential threat to Hawaii, and that's a serious issue. Whether or not they fire it or not, don't play with that, because what if they do fire it? You better hope they shoot it down. I'm not playing with that. And then you got these two guys yelling at each other, and it's not making the case better. So the point I'm making, though, is I'm focusing on, before we get to this remedial prescription, how do you deal with the threat? So right off the bat, the United States is the threat because they're occupying Hawaii. Period. Right? If they weren't here, we wouldn't even have to be talking about this stuff. But did you know before December 7, 1941? Guess what? It happened. But that was conventional weaponry, not nuclear. And why did Japan hit here? Because this was the command center. That's why. That's December 7th. And did you know people died during the Pearl Harbor attack, civilians? Because when you fire weapons, what goes up gotta come down. Nobody talks about the killings outside of Pearl Harbor. A lot of times they just focus on USS Arizona. Hey, that's battle. That's tragedy. But what about civilians that were killed? And then you go back to, wait a minute, they should have never even been in Pearl Harbor. But why did they take over Hawaii? To get Pearl Harbor. They didn't realize that airplanes was going to be made where now Pearl Harbor becomes a target. Prior to that, General Schofield thought Pearl Harbor was perfect because any naval ship coming in can block it. Now you got planes. Okay, now you're sitting ducks. But that's just a game a game changer in fighting. We should not even be involved in any of that stuff because the Hawaiian Kingdom is a neutral state. It's in a Danish treaty. It's in a German treaty. It's in a Spanish treaty. Neutrality. Did you know neutrality only kicks in during war? That's why the laws of war apply to neutral states. You're not neutral during peacetime. You're neutral when war breaks out. Not only was our neutrality violated, we're now brought into the conflict. And that, what happened on Saturday, is an indication of that threat in response to the United States presence. That's the real thing. So I don't play games with weaponry at that level. And the one thing that we need to do is to get this information out so the world knows we're occupied. Don't target us, whether you're China, Russia, or North Korea. I'm not picking one. But you cannot deny the U.S. military is here, and that's the target. We just got used to it. Yeah, I used to go Sandy Beach, just joke around. Yeah, those guys, look, the Marines trying to body surf. They don't know how body surf. Not like, yeah, that's an occupier's military in my country. See, I didn't think of it that way back then. We just used to joke around. They don't know how body surf. We used to go down Fort DeRussy, go fight with them, because we thought just fighting. We didn't realize it was a foreign entity. When we talk about the laws of war, we're talking enemies. Did you know Kalana Napua, the song, Maile Aloha Ina? There's a particular verse that says there, do not sign the paper of the enemy with its sin of annexation and loss of civil rights. See, all of a sudden, these words now resonate. Now, kudime, resonates now. Act of war. And then we look at ourselves and go, oh my God, what are we going to do? So I want to get back to you, so how do we fix the problem? In light of the complexities, yeah? This is not a simple issue. This is complex. And people are not going to like you for saying certain stuff. Hey, get used to it. Just got to get used to the language, right? So, how do you fix this problem? First of all, you got to get the state of Hawaii as an armed force to turn into a military government. Because the state of Hawaii's infrastructure is the infrastructure from the Hawaiian Kingdom. Can't deny that. It is. The Attorney General's office, tax office, that's all from Kingdom Era. They hijacked an already existing system and turned it into an armed force. Right? So we need them to declare that they're a military government. Say, everybody stay in place, but now administer the laws of the occupied state. Now, how do you administer the laws of the occupied state given 125 years of no laws legally been passed? Necessity. Necessity says that you can administer the laws now as long as they're not running contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law. Okay, we have a transition. It's actually my dissertation because my doctoral committee wanted to know how you fix the problem. Number one, education. Number two, begin to comply with the law of occupation, whether you like it or not. Because if you don't, war crimes. See, now everybody's waking up. People will start holding each other accountable. So, get them to administer the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Also, bring the Hawaiian Kingdom up to par with international obligations. So the provisional government has to continue what it already started at the permanent court, but bring the Hawaiian Kingdom back up. What about all the treaties that it hasn't ratified, like the Geneva Conventions of 1949, which protects civilians? What about the Hague Convention number 4, 1907? See, that all came after 1893.
Or the Hawaii Kingdom and the U.S. are the only two who haven't signed on to the Paris Climate Accord.
And signing on to the Paris Climate Accord, exactly. No, I'm definitely serious. That is exactly that. The Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, so that nationals have right to access. Vienna Convention on Treaties, Convention on Political and Civil Rights. I like that, Henry, because you know what? We could lead that whole thing. I'm going to say Henry said. That's a point well taken. I didn't think about that. I'm like, the Paris Accord. Exactly. Did you know that the Hawaiian Kingdom is here today in an international organization that exists today? It's a member of an international organization. Anybody know which one? Nope. No, that's private.
Postal system.
The postal system. Universal Postal Union was formed in 1874 to regulate letters and parcels, yeah, that are being mailed. Yeah. Did you know that when you pay for a parcel to be delivered to Japan, you only pay a fixed rate to enter Japanese territory. You don't pay the full cost to get it to its destination. So let's say a parcel you're sending from Honolulu goes to Tokyo, and your cost of postage gets it to Tokyo. But Tokyo has to get it to Chitose in Hokkaido, the northern island. Did you know, under the Universal Postal Union regulations, it's called terminal dues. Japan has to pay out of its pocket to get it to its destination once it enters into its territory. And the cost that it takes to get it to its destination, in this case, Chitose in Hokkaido, that next year, Japan collects terminal dues from the United States, not from the one who sent the parcel. And vice versa. The Universal Postal Union regulates that. So there are international costs and terminal dues costs. Mary.
Yeah, the other thing, we break something from Hulu, HI. Like, it's not like you're breaking something from AZ, whatever. HI is International Postal Union designation for Hawaii.
Actually, not yet. I looked into it. I thought it was myself, but I was mistaken. But it will be. Because you got to look at what we got as opposed to what we need to get to. And I found out that that hasn't been designated yet because that designation is an alpha something code, and it was begun to be issued in the 1960s or something like that. And that's why it's tied to the internet, because the Universal Postal Union is also a part of a group of agencies, international agencies, that regulate the internet and assign national domain names. But the point I'm making though, terminal dues. So they have to collect. Now the United States does the same thing. Britain does the same thing. Okay. Now, the Hawaiian Kingdom joined the Universal Postal Union on January 1st, 1882.
Wow.
And every 4 years, the Universal Postal Union has a Congress where their representatives meet to discuss the issues and pass regulations with regard to parcel distribution and letter distribution. There's a lot of money involved in this. That's why they regulate it. Okay. Hawaii actually was part of the Congress of the Universal Postal Union when it convened in 1885 in Lisbon, Portugal. Yeah, they were part of it. We've been an inactive member since 1893 because nobody was around to do what we're supposed to do, right? Now, in Hawaiian law, in the Hawaiian Civil Code, it says the Postmaster General is authorized to accept all regulations of the Universal Postal Union that have been passed and to be hereafter passed as the laws of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Ooh, that's good, because that means we can be up to date right now by Hawaiian law. So, there is a complaint that has been filed on the 136th year of Hawaii's membership with the Universal Postal Union on January 1st, this past January 1st.
Oh, cool.
And the complaint actually stems from my research that I found on China. Remember China, I told you, was a non-independent state in the 19th century. And it became independent in the early part of the 1900s, right? Well, China joined the Universal Postal Union in 1914. In 1917, I believe, a formal complaint was made to the Universal Postal Union. Because the fundamental rule of members of the Universal Postal Union is that one state, member state, cannot have its post offices in the territory of another state. In China, you had a lot of foreign post offices there. Remember? Because they weren't recognizing China's independence. So China's complaint was, this is in violation of the UPU convention. We need you to remove these post offices. And it eventually happened. So we have a complaint that is now pending before the Universal Postal Union because United States post offices are all in the Hawaiian Kingdom territory, which is a direct violation of the fundamental rule that one member state cannot have post offices in the territory of another member state.
That's brilliant.
And not only was it an international crime that this post office in an occupied territory was collecting postal fees from private people, it's also an international crime that other countries' governments was paying what the United States was assessing for their terminal dues on all parcels destined to Hawaii. It's called unlawful appropriation of property. So this is, all I'm saying is this is an example of how you come into compliance with ourselves, not just having the United States comply with international law.
Now, do they have a law, a rule on indispensable third parties?
No. It's only for arbitral disputes or disputes in ICJ.
No, you're dangerous.
This one is strictly law, the United States Postal Union Convention and the regulations. And did you know that the only way that a member state can remove itself from the Universal Postal Union, like any other treaty, they have to denounce the convention that they fall under. And then 12 months will kick in, and then they're out. Did you know that's the same thing that applies to any treaty? That's how countries get out of treaties. Give notification that you no longer recognize the treaty you're under, denounce it, and 12 months will kick in. Did the Hawaiian Kingdom ever denounce the Universal Postal Union Convention?
No.
Well, a friend of mine actually went to the Universal Postal Union in Bern, Switzerland, and met with some individuals there, officials, and they said they were shocked that the Hawaiian Kingdom, well, it was told that the Hawaiian Kingdom was a member of the Universal Postal Union. And then they say, no, it was canceled. Their membership was canceled. Like a YMCA type of thing. Cancel their membership, one of the members, because he didn't pay his dues. And the response was, no, it wasn't canceled. And he said, the Hawaiian Kingdom was at the Permanent Court of Arbitration from 1999 to 2001. And the response was, what? See, because that shows it still exists. How to get canceled? Well, you can't cancel. That doesn't apply in international law. Remember, they're sovereign. They're independent of each other. One sovereign state cannot cancel another sovereign state's membership. You can only do it by denouncing. And you know what? That's part of the regulations in the UPU. It says it. Now, what probably was told to the UPU was the United States said Hawaii was annexed by a treaty. Therefore, we were absorbed into the United States. Therefore, our membership, consequently, is void.
Where's the treaty?
But again, there's no treaty, but that was part of the alliance. So the point that I'm making is, there's a lot that can be done in bringing the Hawaiian Kingdom up to par with today's international law. And that has already started. But what is crucial is you had to have been a state, period. Not arguably. You had to have been a state, and you had to be exactly what it was back then. And then also provide for the foundation to negotiate a treaty of peace to include reparations for over 120 something years of war crimes. And that's called negotiations. How do you deal with that? So let me end with Donna James Wheel, a novelist, says, when a well-packaged web of lies has been sold gradually to the masses over generations, the truth will seem utterly preposterous, and its speaker a raving lunatic. Some of you may have thought I was a lunatic earlier, but I'm not, I can assure you. Any questions?
Good.
Wow, that was a good presentation.
And there's going to be up online on the blog, Hawaiian Kingdom blog, there's going to be a brief that lays out everything here that I spoke to. And it already has been translated into Russian, German, Persian or Farsi, Italian. And it's spreading. Because the thing is exposure. So now when you have somebody from a foreign country looking at this, they see it through the lens of international law, not the lens through Hawaiian culture, not the lens through a cultural practitioner, because that's domestic, right? Once they see it internationally, then all of a sudden, nationals of other countries are going to find themselves in the same predicament that we are now realizing we are in, irrespective of our ethnicity or even our nationality. You guys good?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, I love being able to find things like what you have been saying today in places that I can cite, research publications and stuff. The blog thing, I think, I totally want to look.
No, but that shows the citations, everything.
Oh, it does have.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not just a blog article.
Awesome.
It's actually a legal brief that's very legal. Plus, I got my larger articles, and there's many others. So the key here is what I needed to do, or what we needed to do in the provisional government when we got back from the Netherlands, was we needed to institutionalize this information and not politicize it. And the way you institutionalize it, get your master's degree, start publishing, get it peer reviewed, law reviewed. See, that's how it works, right? And that's the key. This takes it out of the realm of politics. Now it gets into critical analysis, analytical rigor, appropriate theoretical framework, blah, 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 blah. That's important. And I think a lot of our people today who have not gone to college to get into the nitty-gritty of these issues, it's up to us who already went to the nitty-gritty to break it down, to make it more
User-friendly.
consumable for public consumption.
So you're just a quasi-lunatic instead of a raving.
Yep. What is that?
Breaking it down so you're a quasi-lunatic instead of a raving.
It's all in the eyes of the beholder.
You know what I mean.
So, this is a book that I would highly recommend you folks get if you want the basic understanding. This is my doctoral dissertation watered down, right? And like I told you folks earlier, I purposely selected my professors to ensure that I get the ones who could not agree with me that Hawaii's occupied. Because I'm not setting myself up to fail. What I'm doing is I'm setting myself up to apply analytical rigor and see if they can find holes. Because if they can find holes, I got to shore it up.
Yep.
That's the key. I'm not into arguing. I don't argue my defense. I defend it. I defend the research. So I purposely selected professors that a broad scope. 3 political science professors, law and judicial behavior, public law, and theory of sovereignty. The dean of the law school at UH, Avi Soifer, U.S. constitutional law. That was his LLM. And he's written a few law articles on that. And Matthew Craven, professor from University of London, Great Britain, state sovereignty and international law. And only had one Native Hawaiian on my committee, Kanalu Young, but he passed away, then replaced by John Osorio. None of them could refute the information, but they could engage it, and they asked some really good questions. And I can tell you, they went through my dissertation with a fine-tooth comb because their names are going to be put on it. And my last committee member to get through was the dean of the law school. Last one, the day before I got to turn in my dissertation so I can graduate. And he kept going over and over and over. So I'm responding. That's how it should be. I said, Alii, any more critique? I'm good. Can you please sign? I got to head up there and give it to them real quick so I can graduate during a fall semester. But I appreciated their engagement, right? And that's how it's supposed to be. So when I'm speaking to you folks about this, I'm not making this stuff up. I went through that process, right? I make it user-friendly for you now, but I teach this stuff. It was interesting. There was a friend of mine, and my friend Lawrence, who befriended him as well. This guy, Jamil. Okay, so Jamil is a professor, very known professor from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He attended a conference that I was at in Cambridge, in England, where about 15 of us were invited. And you had to be invited to the conference, and it was called Non-European Powers in the Age of Empire. So we're talking the Hawaiian Kingdom, Ottoman Turks, Persia, which is Iran, Japan, China, Korea, Madagascar, Siam, Thailand. And did you know all of them thought that Hawaii was like other non-European powers, under the heel of the founding of nations? Because in the 19th century, The family of nations, led by the European powers, were keeping the non-Europeans outside of the family. That's why Japan only came in 1899. That's why China came in after 1900. They were keeping them out. They were saying, you're not civilized enough. You're not Christian enough. This and that. They didn't know that the Hawaiian Kingdom was a bona fide, recognized independent state since 1843. We had no unequal treaties, and they were more so taken aback that the Hawaiian Kingdom had an unequal treaty with Japan that imposed Hawaiian Kingdom law that Hawaiian subjects were subjected to. And that it was the Hawaiian Kingdom that was the first to recognize Japan's full independence in 1893 by Queen Liliuokalani. According to the records, everybody has been portraying it as if it was the British that was the first to recognize Japan's independence in 1894. No, it was the Hawaiian Kingdom, 1893. And that just sparked a lot of talk, right? Well, Jamil came to Hawaii last week, huh? Yeah. And he asked if he could do a tour of Iolani Palace. And he brought scholars of other non-European nations, and we were able to give a presentation to them because Jamil said, I want you to share with them how important the Hawaiian Kingdom was in Japanese development of diplomacy and international relations. That's already being taken up at that level. And then going to the palace, they were tripping.
Yeah.
If you've ever gone to the palace, and with this knowledge now of Hawaii being an independent state, you're going, wow, it resonates more, right? And you could see it was Hawaiian, but appropriating foreign ideas. Not that these were foreign ideas taking over the native.
Yeah.
It was appropriation called hybridity. Yeah? So this information is spreading beyond our circles over here. And that's what's important, right? Yes.
Can you say a little bit of something about the fact-finding that was postponed?
Okay.
Oh, sorry if that's too
No. Good question. Okay, so the fact-finding. So after the South China Sea case, that the Permanent Court of Arbitration, the tribunal had already acknowledged the Larson case. It was a time I felt, and the provisional government, that let's move toward fact-finding. So that means we have to enter into another agreement with Lance Larson to go fact-finding. So we did. And we moved. In January, the agreement was made. By March, I believe, no, by May or April, 3 commissioners have already been appointed. 2 from England, 1 from Belgium. High-level people. Professor Federico Lanzarini is my deputy agent. He was facilitating the convening of the commission. And we're going to constitute them under the Hague Convention number 1, which is what formed the Permanent Court of Arbitration. There's a section there on fact-finding commission of international commission of inquiry. So as this is going on, I'm going, this is too easy. I'm going, this is too fast. But it was great. I'm expecting the United States to kind of throw something at us, right? This is too fast. These commissioners are already being convened. They're European. And then it happened. That's where we found out obstruction from the United States. Because we had hearings set over here beginning tomorrow in this building right here. It was all set. The first hearing of the Commission of Inquiry with regard to the Larson case. 16 and 17. So when the commissioners contacted the Permanent Court of Arbitration for administrative purposes, the commissioner, the Secretary General of the Permanent Court of Arbitration told them that the Permanent Court is not recognizing these proceedings because they referred to a letter that was sent to me and Federico, my Deputy Attorney General, and another professor who's also a judge on the Law of the Sea Tribunal, that entities that are not members of the United Nations cannot participate in the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So I'm like, what? So basically, the commissioners had to back off until this procedural aspect is fixed. But it's administrative, right? Because the Secretary General runs, he's like a clerk. He's like the chief clerk of this entity called the Permanent Court of Arbitration. They provide for coordinating this building, the use of this building. They provide transcribers. They provide this and that. interpreters if needed. That's their job. So I'm looking at that, I'm like, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense because the Secretary General, what is he talking about? We were already in The Hague. What do you mean you gotta be a member of the United Nations? Switzerland was not a member of the United Nations until 2004. But it's a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration since it was established in 1899. It just didn't make sense. And I kind of brushed it off. But once that happened with the commission, I'm like, wait a minute, we have a problem. Big problem. Now the Secretary General can only operate within the rules. He's not a country, right? And any power, any state that ratified the treaty of 1899 that formed the court, they form what is called the Administrative Council. They maintain the court. See, the Permanent Court of Arbitration is not part of the United Nations. The International Court of Justice, and so all the dues that are paid, membership dues, goes to maintaining the International Court of Justice. The countries that ratified the Hague Convention #1, before the UN was even created, they sit on an administrative council and they provide the funding. And they're the ones directly responsible for administration, not picking and choosing whose case is what. As long as the Permanent Court has institutional jurisdiction, right, they gotta take it. That's why our case was taken. Now, they also identified the Hawaiian Kingdom in these proceedings at The Hague. The Permanent Court of Arbitration identified the Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom as a non-contracting power. Whenever you see the word power, power means state. And you can be a contracting power and a non-contracting power. Because in the Hague Convention #1, it says that the court is open to non-contracting powers. But you gotta be a state, that's what the power is. And the contracting powers are the ones that maintain the court to facilitate administration. So I talked to my deputy agent, Federico Lenzerini, professor from Italy. I said, hey, Federico, we gotta file a complaint with the Administrative Council because this Secretary General is going rogue. He's not following the rules. So I needed to look up where he's getting this idea from. So I spoke to a person from London. This was the Matrix in London. This one of the members there is a professor at Glasgow University. So we're talking, and I brought up this issue. And I showed the letter from the Secretary General. What does this mean? What do you get out of that? That you have to be a member of the entities, not members of the United Nations, cannot participate. And he says, he found it odd. He couldn't figure it out. So this guy's being cryptic. Here's a guy at the international level not understanding the crypticness of this cryptic message when everything should be upfront. And then he said, maybe it might have to do with Kosovo. So, okay, Kosovo. Later on, I looked it up. It wasn't Kosovo. Kosovo is actually a breakaway state from Serbia, okay, which is a non-member of the United Nations given observer status. This issue was Palestine. And I found where it was. So Palestine, in 2015, approved or ratified, called a session. They approved the Hague Convention to become a party to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, along with all the rest of them, including the United States. So they filed their accession with the Dutch government, and then the Dutch government asked the Administrative Council, these other countries that have embassies in the Netherlands, to meet on this issue. So they met, 2 meetings took place. The final meeting was March 14th, I believe, 2016. It was the United States with Israel and Canada that was leading the opposition against Palestine to being a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Their argument was, because Palestine is not a member of the United Nations, they cannot be a party to the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The United States was trying to convince the Administrative Council that's their position. The Administrative Council didn't take it. Before the vote was taken, the United States walked out of the meeting. Nobody voted against it. Palestine became a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So here's the problem that the Secretary General has. Number one, that is not a regulation in the Hague Convention. That is a political position taken by the United States, Israel, and Canada. First, we're not trying to become a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. We're continuing where our case left off as a non-contracting power. That doesn't apply to us. But the fact that you were using it to obstruct these proceedings, who do you think the Secretary General may have been acting on behalf of? Do we have a problem with Canada? Do we have a problem with Israel? We got a problem with United States. Our complaint was now prepared because it appears that the United States has infiltrated the highest level of the administration of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and this guy is serving as an agent to obstruct the proceedings of this Commission of Inquiry. That's not good. That is not good. I hope the United States paid this guy a lot of money because his reputation just went out the window. He's supposed to be impartial and not be biased, because you know who are also members of the Permanent Court of Arbitration? Russia, China, Cuba, Venezuela. Yeah. Now it makes sense that the United States cannot obstruct us openly because the Permanent Court of Arbitration already happened. But this was pure covert operation. But you know what it did? It actually allowed us to take it to a higher level. So we went to the Netherlands, and a particular embassy, all I needed was to get one member of the Administrative Council. A particular member of the Administrative Council received me as an ambassador because they verified that I did serve as the agent for the Hawaiian government in the Larson versus Hawaiian Kingdom, which means I had to have been an ambassador if I was in the court to begin with. Received me and was able to provide them a formal complaint against the Secretary General, asking that this country convene an emergency meeting of the Administrative Council, which can be given in 48 hours, at least 48 hours, to remedy this situation. In my mind, what you folks do with the Secretary General, I don't care. Just fix this problem. Just remedy this problem and do your job, because the Secretary General that worked with us before, well, he was quite flabbergasted, because, you know, everybody is when they find out you just saw a ghost who you thought died in 1893 walking in front of you and talking to you, you know. But he still followed the rules. And this guy not following the rules. Now, I can see why the situation is being obstructed, because we go back to Hawaii is the headquarters for the U.S. Pacific Command. It's not a Hawaiian issue. It's not a cultural issue. This is military. And that's where the rubber hits the road. But given that they received it, and we've been in communication ever since, and things are happening. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I do behind the scenes. Some people say, hey, can I be quiet for a few months? I haven't heard anything. Yeah, that's when I'm really working. You know, I don't tell people I'm going to go fishing, otherwise the fish come here and swim away. They come back with the poke. And then you know what kind of fish I got and where I got it from. But I can assure you, things are definitely happening. But people ask, well, what do I do? What can I do? Just get educated. Start to normalize the conversation. If you're in the academy, do some research. And don't be an apologist. Deal with it. Yeah? Deal with it. I was in Italy. They're seeing it. This one person wrote an article. A good friend of mine was here. She's a PhD student at the University of Torino, Milan, I think, out of Milan. And I was in Italy. And she told me that she was able to publish an article, peer-reviewed anthropology, about Hawaii's occupation, and that the Hawaiian-Italian treaty still exists. Now, she came from an Italian perspective, written in Italian. And she said the peer review was quite interesting because it was all in Italian, amongst Italians. And they were coming back to her. No, Hawaii was annexed by a treaty. Here's the citation, because these academics. She showed the citation is wrong, and she said they were thrown upside down. Because they even had to go back to their historical records to fix the problem. So it's not just the Americans. The whole world has been looking at this thing the wrong way. So it's an exciting time, right? And I'm glad that you folks hung out here to listen to this mo'olelo. And I encourage you to keep learning, never stop. And With that, mahalo. Thank you.